All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second session for the Cohort 26 training. Hopefully everybody was able to attend last week's first training. If you were not able to do that, I know there was a last minute time change with that. And so if you were not able to view, if you were not able to be here live for that training, that was understandable, but we do need to make sure that you did watch that training. So please, that was actually sent out to you guys last week in the email that goes out on Fridays. The Erica Rucker sends out from TPI. So a recording for that was in there. And then also as part of that recording, there would have been a QR code for you to sign in and out of the training. So please make sure that you have viewed that training, that you've signed in and signed out, and that you have completed that part of that required grant. Make sure you've gone and watched those videos. Today, we're just going to continue moving through and talking about the RFA, talking about various aspects of the RFA. And so please feel free to ask questions as you go. Let me go to the chat now. I did see a question pop up in the chat. I can go ahead and read that and address it before we get started. But for those of you who are just signing in, please make sure that you go to this QR code. You can use your phone or you can click on the link that's in the chat and make sure you sign in today's meeting. All right, so there's already been a question that's being popped up. If we choose not to begin the Cohort 26 grant cycle until October 1st, will the grant be adversely affected? Our CSFO is very reluctant to proceed, Jackson County. Okay, so yes, that would adversely affect your grant. It is expected for everyone to start on the first day of school, and we have made that, though you're going to have to jump through some extra hoops to do that, we have made it available where you do have funds available to get you started for the first week of school. So that is the expectation. I know a couple of CSFOs are not wanting to do it. I'm not exactly sure why. It may just be because it's extra work. It may be other things. If there's other reasonings other than the fact that it's extra work, that they're not wanting to proceed with this, please reach out to me and let me know what those reasons are. I'm happy to get with accounting and try to figure out a solution, but please make sure that they understand that the federal expectation has always been that these grants would start on the first day of school. There's been some times in the past where we haven't done that because of our fiscal year starting late, and that was the reason why we had changed it this year. And we were hoping that the whole fiscal year was going to change, but it didn't. So even though there are some extra hoops that are going to have to be jumped through as far as getting access to those funds early, that is still the expectation for you guys to do that, because you need to be able to start your programs on the first day of school to not only meet the federal requirements, but also the state requirements. That was in the RFA. Not wanting to do so could potentially, I don't know if it would cause you to lose the grant. I'm not really sure. I haven't really talked with Dr. Killingsworth as to what we want to do for sites who would not want to do that. But if that's going to be a major issue, then please reach out to me individually, and we can talk about that. Talk about what our options are. I don't want to take the grant away from anyone, but again, that is one of the expectations is for these grants to start on the first day of school. So please make every effort to do that. All right. So Erica has, I noticed in the chat, she has put up the link to last week's meeting for you to watch. So of course you don't need to do that right now, but save the link and you can get to it later and watch it after this meeting, or when you have, as soon as you have a chance. And we're just going to go on with today's meeting. So I'll put this QR code up again in a little while for those who may come in a little bit late. If I forget, just remind me. But again, the link is also in the chat. All right, so last week, and again, I'm not going to put this into presentation mode just because it messes up all my screens and I can't see the chat if I do that. So I hope this works for you guys. You can see all my little errors and things that might pop up, but this is just the easiest way to share the presentation with you. I will make sure that I send you these slides so that if there's any links in the slides, I can't remember if today's has links in it or not. Right now, I'm just barely getting by from day to day with preparing for this and preparing for Mega and all the other things that are coming up. Anyway, I will make sure these slides get sent to you this week. It may be Friday before you get them. It may be in Friday's email, but we'll get that signed in. Okay, I saw another question pop up. You mentioned an email that included recording. How do we sign up to get on that email list? Okay, so Erica, if you want to put in the chat the Cohort 26 contact list, if everybody who is a site coordinator or a program director needs to make sure that you have filled out the Cohort 26 contact list so that you will be added to the weekly emails that go out and, you know, any other communication that goes out to the sites. So Erica says she'll add that link in just a bit. So there it is. So the link is in the chat now, if you'll go to that and make sure that you have filled out that form, that will get you added to the weekly emails that go out every Friday and any other communication that goes out about Cohort 26. For those of you who are program directors who may have new people that you might right now be hiring site coordinators and things like that, please make sure that when you hire somebody new into your program that serves in any kind of administrative position, that you please make sure you either go fill out this contact form, or if you can't find it, email Erica so that she can add those people to our contacts for Cohort 26 so that we make sure that everybody is getting the communications they need to be getting and nobody is left out of anything important. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Last week when we left off, we were talking about state level program requirements. We finished up talking about field trips and the requirements around those. And so there's just a couple of more items that were listed under state level program requirements that we needed to discuss. So one of those items is the student to teacher ratio. So in the RFA, it does say that a student teacher ratio of 12:1 or less is encouraged. Again, I chose to use the wording encouraged because I understand that it depends on the situation, right? We're not going to say that this is a requirement. It's just an encouragement. We would like you to keep that student teacher ratio as close to 12:1 as you can. And we also encourage you to use certified instructors in those core subject areas to ensure that instruction correlates with the Alabama academic standards as much as possible. So we understand that there are times when you can't find certified instructors. You may have to use someone else instead. And so there's a list here under the second bullet of individuals that you could also hire that should be knowledgeable of the Alabama academic standards and have those necessary subject matter credentials. And so that might be retired or former educators. It could be third or fourth year college students that are majoring in education, such as English, reading, math, or another appropriate subject. It could be individuals who've earned a bachelor's degree or higher in education. They may not necessarily have their teacher certification, but they do have a bachelor's degree in those subjects and might be able to teach those subjects. Again, this is what's encouraged. It is not a requirement, but is highly encouraged, especially when you're hiring people who are going to be teaching any kind of core subject area or doing any kind of intervention with the students and things like that. I have seen, before I came to federal programs, I actually worked with AMSTA. I helped run the Science and Motion program for high school science. And I learned firsthand how a someone who's teaching a science activity who doesn't actually understand the science behind the activity can actually create misconceptions in students' minds that could actually really, really harm their education down the line. So that's why it's really, really important that you have people who know what they're doing when they're talking about any kind of subject area, because it's really easy to put incorrect information into a child's head. And then once it's in there, it's really extremely difficult to get that information back out of their head. As a matter of fact, I can't remember the exact statistics, but they say that once a child, and especially in science is my specialty, so, or used to be, it's been a while now. But I remember them saying, you know, once a child learns a scientific fact incorrectly, you literally have to prove to them like 10 times the correct way or the correct science before they'll even believe you. A lot of times, you know, they believe that first thing that they're told, and then they get that set in their head, and it's really, really hard to get rid of those misconceptions. And so that's why it's really, really important if you're going to be doing any kind of activities that have anything to do with science or math or, you know, English, that you've got people who are teaching these subjects that are actually knowledgeable about the subjects. We don't want to actually harm kids' education by having people teach them that don't understand what they're teaching. Again, that 12-to-1 ratio is encouraged, but it's not required. You know, when we start seeing situations where you've got a way higher ratio than that or a way lower ratio than that, we might start asking questions. You know, if we see that you've got one teacher for every 20 kids, you know, our ALSD specialist might start, you know, asking about that and asking what the reasoning behind that is. And same thing if you've got like one teacher for every 5 kids, that's way too much, right? That's you're spending too much money on staff. You might not need that many staff. So try to keep it around that 12-to-1 ratio. All 21st century staff, including program directors and site coordinators, must submit detailed work hours activities through personnel activity reports, or PARs. So we're going to talk about PARs next and really focus on those. They are what we use. That's what you use to reflect any time that's worked during regular program hours for any of your staff. So let's talk a little bit more detail about PARs. All right, again, I've already said this, all staff, including program directors, site coordinators, must submit PARs, personnel activity reports, that are reflective of any time worked during regular program hours. This documentation must be submitted monthly in eGap with the timesheet of any staff claiming time outside of program hours. So there is a separate form that has to be filled out if you have anyone that's working outside of your normal program hours. Let's say maybe for a field trip or something like that, there's a separate document that has to be filled out in those cases. So the PARs themselves are just for work that your staff is doing during your regular program hours, and then you have a separate form that has to be filled out for any work that's done to get permission to work, for your staff to work outside of program hours. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit. The details provided should match the amount of the time that's claimed in your ES2s, your expenditure reports, and failure to provide timely and complete documentation may result in non-reimbursement. So this is a requirement for everyone to submit monthly, and by not submitting these PARs, you may not be reimbursed for those those staff for the work that they've done. All right, I don't know why things keep sliding around. Let's make that a little bit better. Okay, so this is what the PAR sheet looks like. As you can see, hopefully you can see this. You put in your LEA or CBO name, the site, the employee's name, what their position is, their employee number and rate of pay, and the pay period that you're submitting for. And then there's 4 weeks, well, actually there's 5 weeks incorporated into this form where you'll put the date, the time that they signed in, the time they signed out, the total hours they worked that day, and what they did during that time, what their responsibilities are. These forms must be signed by both the employee, signed and dated by both the employee and the site coordinator, or the program director. It doesn't have to be both the site coordinator and program director, but one of those admins must sign that form verifying that that is the hours that that person worked. Okay. And again, there is a link here that takes you to that form, and we will provide that to you in when we send you these PowerPoint slides. All or some administrative hours may be scheduled outside of the normal program's operating hours. So let me explain what that means. You may have some staff who doesn't necessarily have to work during 21st century program hours. For example, you may hire someone who is considered an administrative staff who is your financial person. Your person who handles your financials does not necessarily have to do that during 21st century program hours. They might do that, during the regular school day or on the weekends or however best for them, whatever time works out for them to do that. So that can be allowed. Time claimed as hours worked for other non-administrative employees paid by 21st century funds should primarily occur during the center's operating days and hours. So in other words, outside of your administrative staff for your 21st century program, most of the time your other staff is going to be working during program hours. You really shouldn't have teachers or assistants or anything like that necessarily working very often outside of regular program hours. A non-administrative employee can work 1 hour before students arrive and or 1 hour after the students are dismissed for the program. So they can do that to help prepare for the day if needed, or to clean up after, get ready for the next day, that sort of thing. So again, they can work up to an hour before the program starts or an hour after, or both if needed. But just know that if you're claiming they're doing that every day, that's going to be kind of a red flag in my head. That's going to be a question. Like, do they really need to come an hour before every day and an hour after every day? If there's a reason for that non-admin employee's work hours to extend beyond that 2-hour period before, your hour before and hour after, such as for pre-opening planning, you must request approval from the ALSDE using the 21st century verification of planning form before working the hours. So again, there is a form. I don't know if there's a link here to it, but we will make sure we get you that. I think it's on the next sheet. So again, let me make sure you understand. If you need your staff, your non-admin staff, to work outside of your regular program hours, including that hour before your program starts or the hour after, you need them to work another time, say this summer leading up to the school year starting to get ready for the school year to start, then you need to have that approved before they work those hours. So you would need to submit the form that's called the 21st Century Verification of Planning Form. You would need to submit that to your ALSDE representative for approval before they work those hours. If you don't get it submitted before and they work those hours and we don't approve it, you're not going to get reimbursed for that time. So just make sure anytime you have your staff working outside of your regular program hours, that you have that approved first, so that you're not put into a situation where you've had employees come in and work, but what you had them work on wasn't approved by the ALSDE, and now you have to pay for that out of some other funding source other than 21st Century. Okay, so this is what that form looks like. There is a link to it in the PowerPoint, so when that's sent to you, you'll have that link. And again, this is what this looks like. It says, you have to say whether it's extended day planning or summer planning. You have to put the name of all the, of your site and your of your LEA or CBO. It just gives you the requirements. And then it asks you to attach the dates, hours, and work activities that you're asking for them to work on, that you're trying to get approval for. So you would attach it to this form. All right, if you have any questions that pop up, just feel free to put them in the chat. I am monitoring that. And Kathy, I see you just signed in. There should be a link at the beginning of the chat for you to actually sign in using a Google form instead of the chat. So just letting you know that that's there. Okay. All right. So again, this is a non-negotiable. Without you submitting your PARs and your timesheets on time, it can cause you to be considered a high-risk site. And you might not get reimbursed, or you may eventually lose funding if it becomes an issue or becomes a problem. So this is just one of those things that you have to do to stay in compliance with the grant. Kind of one of those pain in the butt things that has to be done, but it is a required thing for you to do. Okay, and then this next sheet is your staff ratio sheet. This is kind of reflecting back to that first slide we looked at, talking about the student ratios. And I'm sorry, this is hard to read. Let me fix this really quick. Give me a second. Well, I can't really make it any better. So hopefully you guys can see this. So during times of academic instruction, a student to teacher ratio of 12:1 or less is encouraged. Again, this is during academic instruction. So this is when you're actually doing something that has to do with math, literacy, reading, science, something like that. Okay. We encourage you to have a 12:1 ratio of your teacher to students. Again, we also encourage you to use certified instructors in core subject areas so that their instruction does correlate with the Alabama academic standards. Okay. There is a staff ratio form for you to complete, at least for now. This is one of those things that I'm thinking about getting rid of, but we'll see. I think that's why I left this slide like this, because I was still hesitant. I wasn't sure if we were going to continue to do these, but for now, we're going to go ahead and put it out there. We'll let you know if this is something we decide not to do in the future. But you would complete this weekly and ensure that it's aligned with your easy reports. You're going to keep this for your records, but you should complete it by the 15th of each preceding month. And either your TA or your ALSDE specialist may reach out to you to ask to see this. So what I'm thinking in my head is that this is something that we kind of ask you to keep on your own at your site, and we don't ask for you to turn this into us regularly. However, if we feel like there may be an issue with your staffing or your staff ratios, we may ask to see this form, which is why you would want to keep it. We may, again, if we feel like if your program is only serving 50 kids and you've hired 10 teachers or 10 academic or certified staff to teach those kids, then that ratio is off a little bit. We may ask to see your staff ratio form because, again, a ratio of 5:1 would be kind of excessive. A ratio of 10:1 might be excessive, maybe not. But 12:1 is where we want to try, where we would like to see you try to keep your staff ratios, especially for academic instruction. Okay. Any questions about PARs or staff ratios before we move on? All right. I'm going to keep going, but if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. All right. Other state level program requirements. Methods for initial identification and approval of enrolling students and their ongoing participation must be established. Community learning centers must implement controls for acceptable student behavior during out-of-school time. Students cannot be required to attend extended day programs. Okay, so we kind of touched on this last week, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands that you should have some written process, some sort of application some way that you're going to identify and approve the students that you're going to enroll into your 21st century program. Highly suggest that you have some sort of application that your families fill out, that the family of the students fill out. This is also going to be a needed thing if you are going to serve any private schools that are nearby. You know, you want to have an application for those students to fill out that is very similar, or that is exactly the same really as the one that you give your public school students. But you need to have some way that you're going to identify the students who are going to be interested in your program, and some way that you're going to enroll students. You may not have a problem with getting, you may not have an issue with having too many kids want to come to your program. It may be the other way around, especially if you're just starting out. It may be that, that you have to spend the first few months of your program trying to get kids to come in and sign up. But then some sites who are established and have really good programs, they or have had those in the past, they may have almost like a waiting list. And so or in areas that there's a real huge need for an after school program, you may end up having a waiting list. And so you need to have some sort of process in place of how you're going to have these kids enroll, and how you're going to determine which kids or how many kids you can serve. And if you do end up having more kids sign up than not, then what is going to be your procedure for are you going to have a waiting list? How are you going to handle that? So that needs to be, you need to go ahead and be thinking about that and have that established. Again, you should have some sort of controls for student behavior. You should have some behavior guidelines in place for your students, of what your expectations of how those students should act while they're at your 21st century program. So you can create posters, you can, have it in writing, put it into the handbooks that you send home to parents, or talk about it during your parent meeting. But go ahead and have some standards for acceptable behavior for your program. In order for these kids to participate in after school, we expect them to do this, and have those expectations written down, and make sure that you're sharing that with your sites. And another thing is, you cannot require kids to attend an extended day program. So this can't be like, it can't be used as a punishment or something like that. Of course, you can suggest it. You can try to get kids to come who need to be coming, but you can't require it. This is not a required program. Subgrantees must maintain direct oversight of the implementation and administration of the 21st century program. You cannot subgrant to another organization to run your program. Okay. So you guys, and I don't know if I've explained this in past, sometimes in older documents, you might see you guys referred to as a grantee, but really technically you guys are subgrantees. The federal government grants the 21st Century Award to Alabama. So Alabama is actually, the state of Alabama is actually the grantee. And then we subgrant that award out to the subgrantees, to the sites. We do not allow that to be further subgranteed out. So you can't take your allocation and then hire someone to meet the needs of the students. You can't take your subgrant and use that to pay another organization or another LEA or anything like that to run your 21st century program. Okay, so that's not allowed. Subgrantees are not allowed to charge students and their family members any fees of any kind. Okay, you cannot charge them to get a snack in the afternoon. You cannot charge them to go to field trips. You can't charge them any kind of fee to be part of the program. Even if you in the past have run an after school program where students had to pay to be a part of that program, if you're now funding that part, at least any part of that program with 21st century funds, you can no longer charge those students or their students' families to come to your after school program. we talked a little bit last week about supplement, not supplant. This is a perfect example of where you can say that funding is no longer available. Is in that case, exactly. Maybe before you did run an after school program, but parents had to pay for the child to come and be a part of that after school program. But now you've gotten the 21st Century Grant. Those funds are going to go away because that's no longer allowed as a 21st Century subgrantee. And now you're going to replace those funds with 21st Century funds to fund your program. So just keep that in mind, that you can't charge families or parents or the kids anything for the 21st Century program, including snacks, food, field trips. You can't make them buy t-shirts, anything like that. Another thing that I do want to go ahead and say, and I may be saying it out of turn, it may be in one of these, I don't remember seeing it, is that you can't have program income either. I'm not sure if that was actually addressed in the RFA, but it just popped into my mind as something I might need to mention. So an example of this would, let's say you have let's say that you have a cooking class as part of your 21st Century program. Maybe you bought one of these cool kitchen items. I can't think of what it's called off the top of my head right now, but there's a really neat kitchen that you can actually buy, kind of a movable kitchen that you can buy to teach the kids nutrition or to teach a cooking class as part of your 21st Century program. You cannot like have the kids make cookies and then sell them. Kitchen a la carte. Thank you, Jennifer Baker. Kitchen a la carte. So let's say you purchase that and you're going to do a cooking class. You can't like do a bake sale or anything like that with 21st Century funds and then use that to build up your program income. You can't make money off of 21st Century. Even if that money is going to just be turned around to be used for 21st Century, it's just not an allowable thing, which, you know, I could see where it could be useful. Like, for example, you could use those funds to pay for kids' food at a field trip or something like that. I get that, but it's just not allowable. You're not supposed to like sell anything or make anything and create any kind of program income. Can outside resources donate to your program? Absolutely. Community, you know, businesses and things can donate, but you just can't create program income. You can't sell it. You can't like use 21st Century resources to make something, sell it, and then make money off of that. That's not an allowable expense. Okay. We mentioned this already last week about how all costs associated with 21st Century, including field trips, should be included in your project budget. So again, there's no reason to charge families for any of those things. And then here is one that's actually changed now. Subgrantees are not allowed to use 21st Century funds for any food purchases, including snacks, unless these purchases are to be used as a part of an approved cooking class, cooking demonstration, or a health nutrition education lesson. So we have new guidance that has come out since the RFA that is under certain circumstances will allow you to potentially use 21st Century funds to buy food, but only during certain circumstances, and it would have to be approved by the ALSDE, and we're going to talk about that today. So I'm not gonna focus on it right this second, but because we do have several slides about purchasing food and the restrictions behind that. But this is a change from the RFA. Now, of course, you are still allowed to buy food for those enrichment activities, like your approved cooking class, your nutrition class, things like that. But there may be certain circumstances where you can also use 21st Century funds to buy food, especially during the summer. But again, we're going to touch on that in just a little bit. I don't want to focus on that right this second. Again, it just talks here about you're not allowed to charge students or their parents for costs associated with supplemental snacks or meals. So you can't charge for a snack, can't charge for a drink, anything like that. Okay. So when it comes to food, and this is just part of the RFA, and again, we're going to talk more about this actually in just a second, but what you're encouraged to do for food, let's focus first on after school programming, really after school or summer. You're encouraged to reach out to your Alabama State Child Nutrition Program to have any kind of after-school snacks be provided to your 21st Century program. And then if you're doing a summer program, you also can reach out to the CMP to provide food for your summer program. There are several different programs that they run, including after school, the National School Lunch Program, the After School Snack Program, NSLP Seamless Summer Option. There's all different programs out there that CMP, your CMP person should be able to help you with providing snacks and meals to the students. Because this is an option it should be an option for all sites, especially during the school year. All LEAs have a CMP program. And for those of you who are a CBO, you should also still be able to reach out to the LEA, to the CMP program for the LEA that you're serving, and they should also still be able to provide those snacks for your after school program or for your summer program, snacks and meals for summer, potentially. Summer's a little bit more difficult than the school year. School year, all programs run. During the summer, not all CMP programs run during the summer. So we're going to focus on that in just a moment. But here is the link to the CMP website. Highly recommend that you reach out to your CMP director at your LEA or the LEA of the schools that you're serving and see about working out an MOU with them to provide those after school snacks. So just to kind of give you a little bit background information, during the school year, those programs that CMP runs are allowed to provide 2 meals and a snack a day for free. And so typically they provide breakfast and lunch to the school during the school day, and then they'll provide you a snack in the afternoon for your after school program. Okay. Summer is a little bit different. All right. So let's talk about that. What is allowable for food? Again, this is our current guidelines. Current guidelines leading up until recently, very recently, you could only use funds to purchase food for a snack if it was part of an enrichment activity, such as a cooking lesson or nutritional or health lesson. Okay. But because of new federal guidance, there's a new guidance in Edgar, which you'll hear me refer to frequently, that there are certain situations where it is allowable to use federal funding to purchase food if you can justify the reasoning for it. And so knowing that, we've tried to be more flexible about this. Okay, so all right, so let's talk about, I accidentally did not transfer a slide over, but there should have been a slide here that talks about supplement, not supplant. So during the school year, because CMP is an available program, you have to use CMP to get your afternoon snacks. Okay, that's basically your only option unless you're doing an enrichment activity. Okay, because that's available. Otherwise, it would be considered supplanting, because if you purchase snacks instead of using CMP, which is the preference for you to use, and it's an available thing for you to use, that would be considered supplanting, and that would be against program rules. Okay. But summer programs are different. The supplement, not supplant rule still applies to summer programming, but it's different because the summer feeding programs, I don't know why all my slides are off track, I'm so sorry. The summer feeding programs only can provide a total of 2 meals or snacks per day. So again, during the school year, they can provide 2 meals and a snack. That's 3 items, right? During the summer, the CMP summer feeding programs only can provide 2 meals or 2 snacks a day, not both. And so because of that, if you're running a summer program and you've got CMP that is providing it, let's say you're doing an all-day program, like an 8-hour program during the summer, Your CMP can provide breakfast and lunch, but they're not going to be able to provide an after-school snack. And you really need, there's been situations in the past where people really needed to be able to provide that afternoon snack for those kids. So in the past, people were expected to reach out to community members and ask for donations, reach out to local businesses. One of the very first things that I heard at a presentation when I very first was considered even applying for this job was people, was that this was an issue because, talking about principals having to fork out money to pay for snacks, or the program director having to pay for snacks out of their own pockets because they needed to be able to provide snacks for these kids. And so that was something I knew right off the bat that I needed to be able to fix. And thanks goodness, because of these new federal guidelines, we were able to say that, well, that's a good justification. That is a justification for you to purchase snacks for your program, as if your CMP program can only offer breakfast and lunch, but they can't offer a snack. Okay. So here's those requirements. Now we still, if you have a CMP program that's being run in your LEA, now this is just for summer programming. This should not apply to the school year. If it ever comes up during the school year, please reach out and let me know. But this really shouldn't be a problem during the school year. It's just an issue during the summer. So here's what we're going to ask. We're going to ask you to use your CMP program to purchase these snacks if at all possible. One of the hesitations in allowing this was our concern about the federal requirements, the nutritional requirements that the feds have about things like food and snacks. I hear about this all the time. My husband actually works for CMP here at the State Department, and so I hear him talking about this all the time. But that was a concern that I had was, how are we going to make sure that the funds are not being used just to buy junk for the kids? It's basically what went through my head. And so what we decided was that if you can, we would prefer for you to purchase the snack from your local CMP program. That way they can make sure that the snack that's being provided meets those federal nutritional guidelines. So that's your first option. Reach out to your CMP program and ask if you can purchase snacks through CMP. And if they agree to that, then we expect them to provide a meal calculation to tell us how they determine what the cost of that snack was going to be. Now, just those of you who've been with 21st Century, you've heard me say this before, but for those of you who are new, I just want to give you some background info about CMP. And I kind of already touched on this some, and I'm sorry I'm being scatterbrained, but I'm trying to make sure you are fully understand the situation here. So for summer programming, not all LEAs run a summer feeding program. It is not a requirement from the feds. So it is an option. And if you don't know much about CMP, basically the way it works is they claim a certain number of meals and the federal government reimburses the CMP program for the meals that they claim. And with inflation and the way our economy is right now, there's a lot of CMP programs who actually end up in the hole each year because the amount they're being reimbursed is not necessarily covering the amount of cost that it costs for them to feed these kids, just because everything is so crazy expensive right now. And so there's a good reason why some CMP programs don't want to run during the summer. They can't afford to. Also, it may be that they have a really hard time finding staff to work during the summer, and so they may not run for that purpose either. But if they are going to run, then this is a good way for them to kind of make a little bit of money to help their programs. They can charge you guys a reasonable amount of money for a snack and actually can earn some, can actually get more for that food than they typically would get from the federal government. However, we don't want that amount to be an outrageous amount. We want to make sure that it is reasonable and comparable to fair market prices. So what we asked them to do is create a meal calculation, which explains how they came up with the cost of the snack. That meal calculation can include the cost of, the staff it takes to order the food, the staff it takes to put the food together, to package it in some kind of way. And they'll know what you're talking about. When you reach out to your CMP program, they understand what a meal calculation is because they have to do this all the time. But this was something that my husband actually helped me come up with because, trying to be as fair and equitable as possible. I also did go and present this information to the CMP directors at a recent conference that they have. And so they know that this might be something that you guys will ask for. And I did my very best to try to encourage them to work with you guys as much as possible in your programs. And gave them this as kind of I dangled this as kind of a carrot. This is kind of a way that you might be able to make some money for your program. Again, I'm not telling anyone to charge anything outrageous and try to scam the 21st century program by any means, but hopefully your CMP programs will want to work with you to do this. So far, we've had a really good, I haven't heard anything but positive things as far as the CMP directors working with our sites. Again, this has to be approved by the State Department. And so you would need to create an MOU with your child nutrition program. We're going to talk about MOUs and contracts maybe today if we get to it, but a memorandum of agreement would need to be created with your child nutrition program. And in that memorandum of agreement, they need to say the number of snacks that you're providing per day, the number of days those snacks will be provided, the price per snack, which includes that meal calculation formula, and the total contracted amount. And that would need to be submitted with your EGAP application for approval from the State Department of Education. Okay, so again, we'll talk about MOUs later on as we do these trainings, but that is what is expected when you are going to purchase a snack or food from your CMP program. Again, if any questions pop up, please feel free to put them in the chat. So what about though, if your LEA CMP program is not running a summer feeding program? What are you expected to do, right? So this question came up, and it's a very good question because some are not running a program. So with permission, you may be able to also use 21st century funds to provide breakfast, lunch, and a snack for your summer program, okay? So here's the requirements for that. You must provide a letter from your superintendent stating that the LEA CMP program will not run any summer feeding programs during that summer. And then you must submit a meal plan proposal that includes the cost of each meal with meal cost calculation, the contractor who's going to provide the meals, a plan for how that food is going to be delivered and stored, if necessary, and where those meals will be served. This meal plan proposal must be approved by the ALSDE. Again, we highly recommend that you contract to purchase meals or snacks from a CMP program, maybe from another LEA. There are several LEAs that actually serve schools from other LEAs in their general area. I think the Elmore County CMP program serves like 4 or 5 other LEAs in their area. They actually provide meals and food to their students during the summer. So in a lot of cases, even if your LEA is not running a CMP program, there may be one nearby that you can purchase the meals and food from. Okay, so that's the first thing that we would ask for you to try to do. And if you're not sure, you can reach out to me and I can reach out to my husband. And we can try to find out what LEAs near you are doing summer feeding, and so that you can reach out to them and see if they're willing to contract with you to provide the food for your program. If you can't do that, if there isn't any CMP program running anywhere near you, then you can reach out and potentially hire a local restaurant or fast food, preferably not that, but I know that that happens sometimes, maybe the local Chick-fil-A or something like that, to provide food for your program. Again, you have to submit this meal plan proposal that includes how much this is going to cost, what who the contractor is going to be, how you're going to serve this food, how are you going to make sure that it's going to stay safe for the kids to eat, if it's being delivered at a certain time of the day, how are you going to store it, that sort of thing. As you can tell, that's a little bit more scary than reaching out to a CMP program. So that's what we prefer for you to do, is reach out to CMP. But if you can't, if there's not a CMP program that's running anywhere near you, then you can contract to purchase meals from a local restaurant, maybe a local church, something like that, that has a kitchen. We highly recommend that you try to follow CMP nutritional guidelines as much as possible, but this is not something that we're going to police because we're just not qualified to do so. We're letting you know now that that's the expectation, that you try to follow those nutritional guidelines. But again, as the federal programs, 21st Century ALSDE staff, we're not going to be asking to see your menus every day and make sure that you're serving a certain percentage of meat and a certain percentage of vegetables and all that kind of stuff a day. We're just not going to do that. So we ask that you follow those nutritional guidelines, but we're not going to police that. All right, any questions about food before I move on? Because this is something new. Don't see anything popping up. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. Okay, the next big topic. This was another oops, accidental thing that was left out of the RFA. It was in there, but not specific enough about the criminal background check. According to the RFA, it said a favorable criminal background check must be on file for all staff and volunteers who will work directly with students before they're allowed to work for the project. As you can see, there's some stars that have been added, and this should have included the word fingerprinted in order for this to be in accordance with our state laws. And that was something that I accidentally messed up on by not including in the RFA. However, this is a state requirement, and so that is what we're going to talk about now and make sure that everybody understands this. I did send this information out to you guys in an email a few weeks back so that you would know about this, but let's talk about the reasoning behind this. It's always a fun topic that has been met with mixed feelings from sites in the past or over this past year, but it is an important one. So here's the law. The law stipulates that any certified or non-certified individual of public educational facilities and any individual of a non-public educational facility that works with children, youth, adolescents, or the elderly in either a paid or voluntary capacity must undergo a criminal background check and be fingerprinted. And this is part of the Child Protection Act of Alabama from 1999. And then there's several other acts here that are listed that this applies to. Okay. So Alabama law says that if you've got anyone who, whether they're paid or not paid, that is working directly with children, whether it is a public facility or a private facility, if it's considered an educational facility, they have to have that fingerprinted background check. So this is all personnel working in the program. This is all volunteers and high school graduates who work directly with students, and this is vendors that work with students. So the vendor one is one that's kind of caused some issues. And volunteers to a certain extent, but this is one that kind of put a kink in a lot of people's programs this past year when we brought this to everyone's attention. This has always been in the RFAs in the past. It was my accident, my just a typo basically, that I left it out of this particular one. All right, so here's our directives when it comes to any person paid with 21st Century funds. So we reached out to our State Department law lawyers that work here, and reached out to them about this requirement, because what had been said in the past, what we found out, and for those of you who have had a 21st century program in the past, you may recognize this. But even though in the past RFAs it said that you had to have a fingerprinted background check, it didn't specify how you got that fingerprinted background check and where you go to, if there was a certain place you had to go to verify this background check. According to our legal team of the State Department, any person paid with 21st century funds, whether they're 21st century staff or a contracted vendor, that has direct contact with children, must have a current and clear background check status in the ALSDE teacher certification portal. So this was something that wasn't necessarily, I don't know if it's ever been brought to people's attention prior to this past year. We said that you had to have a fingerprinted background check, but we did not, I don't think it was ever specified that they had to have that status, that cleared status in the ALSDE teacher certification portal. So this was new to some people this year. All of your staff that you hire that work for a local LEA, they should have had this done. You guys know, you remember when you first got your job. For me, that was almost 25 years ago. I had to go and get a fingerprinted background check, and that was done through the teacher certification portal. So anybody that you already are hiring that works with your LEA should already have this done. But you can check it by going to, I think this is a link. Yes, this is a link. And again, I'm going to send you these PowerPoints. This is a link to the teacher certification portal, and you should just be able to search that person's name and information, and it will bring them up, and it'll have, I believe, if I remember correctly, it'll be green and it'll say cleared background check or something to that effect. You can just print that and put that into your files. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. So that's the first place you look to see if your staff has had this fingerprinted background check. If they are not located in the portal, then they need to go through the ALSDE teacher certification process to obtain this clearance before you allow them to work with students. So if you're hiring anyone that is not currently listed under the teacher certification portal, then they need to go through the teacher certification portal to get this background check done. Okay. We have some steps. You should be able to do that through your LEA. Your LEA should have like a packet that they use to give to new teachers or any new staff that they hire, that tells them how to go about doing this. But if you don't, or if you're a CBO and you don't have these instructions, please reach out to us and we can send you those instructions. We did get teacher certification to send us instructions for people who need to get into the teacher certification system but aren't an LEA or aren't part of an LEA. So we can send you that information. If you need it, just reach out and we can get that to you. Again, this applies to all 21st, anybody who's paid with 21st century funds, anyone who's paid with 21st century funds. So Jennifer asked if she could share something. So yes, Jennifer Baker, please feel free. Hopefully you can unmute yourself. Let's see. Maybe you can't.
Yes, I would be able to.
Okay.
I was just going to let everybody know, you can go on the T-Cert, the Alabama T-Cert, but if you are affiliated with an LEA, I have access at the district level to what we call the AIM portal, and the teacher certification verification in the AIM portal allows you to search by social security number, and that is much more user friendly, because you might have the name of the person that you're searching for in T-Cert, and let's say it was a para or a volunteer, but there might be 3 or 4 different people in T-Cert, but in the AIM portal, it gives you the opportunity to search by social. So I just thought I'd share that with everybody. It made my process a lot faster when I was trying to pull those and match them to my contracts and be sure that everybody was good to go.
Perfect. Thank you, Jennifer. I didn't know that. I didn't even know that was a thing you could do. So thank you for sharing that. To add that to my list here. Okay. There are some links here to the education certification site and steps for registering for criminal history. This is all, I think this is all from the TCERT website, but you're welcome to use these links. So this applies to those who you've paid with 21st century funds, okay? Now, unpaid people who work with students, we have to handle differently. Teacher certification kind of reached out after this became kind of a thing this past year. And we told people that their volunteers had to have this background check done. People started reaching out to certification and they were like, whoa, 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 wait, we don't do volunteers. Okay. So we had to handle that differently. Okay, so the question just popped up. So I'm clear. As a CBO, we will reach out to you and your team about how we get our staff and volunteers cleared through this process. So you can do that. What I suggest as a CBO first is to try to reach out to your LEA that you're serving and see if they can help you with the process. If they're not able to, then yes, we can send you directions of how to do this. We can send you directions of the steps that need to be taken to get your paid staff and your paid vendors and things into the TCERT portal. So yes, you can reach out to us and we can help you with that. But another step, that if you have a good relationship with the LEA that you're going to be serving and working with, then they can also help you with that process as well. So either way, it's typically the same thing. It's just a matter of whether your LEA is willing to help you with that or not. If they're not, that's fine. We can send you the directions. So yeah, just email me or one of the ALSCE specialists and we can get you those instructions. Okay. So for unpaid volunteers that work with students, now this applies to adult volunteers who work directly with students that could potentially be left unsupervised with a child or children. Okay. Say if a teacher goes to the restroom or something like that, they need to undergo a fingerprinted background check as well. So we have a lot of 21st century sites that have, for example, they have like local people from local churches come in and serve as mentors or help volunteer, help out with the programs, and that's fantastic. That is wonderful. But just because they're coming from a local church does not mean that they're safe to be around students. Okay. They still need to go through this fingerprinted background check. And we say adults because we feel like that's going to be, you know, more than likely, if someone's going to be left alone with a kid, it's going to be an adult. You're not probably going to leave like a younger, a college student or another high school student or something alone with children. It's probably going to be adult. It's probably going to be Miss Susie from the church down the road that comes and volunteers every day, who's wonderful and sweet and great. And if the teacher needs to run and go do something at the office or go to the bathroom or something like that, then it's real easy to just say, Miss Susie, can you watch the kids for a minute while I go run and do that? Well, we just need to make sure that Miss Susie's safe, right? And has had that background check done. So there's different ways that you can do this, but these are the requirements. When you do that fingerprinting background check, this is what it searches for, this list. So it searches the state criminal and sex offender registry, in the state where the volunteer resides and each state where the volunteer has resided during the past 5 years. It's a search of the state-based child abuse and neglect registries and databases in the state where the volunteer resides and in each state where the volunteer resided during the past 5 years. It searches the National Crime Information Center. The fingerprinting part searches the Federal Bureau of Investigation, using the integrated automated fingerprint identification system. And then there is a search of the National Sex Offender Registry that is done through this fingerprint. If you go and have the fingerprinted background check, all of these things are searched for. Please know there's a lot of other background checks that you can pay for that don't include the fingerprint, and they are not good enough. Okay, it has to be the fingerprinted one. Yes, it is more expensive, but it is the one that is going to make sure that all of these different databases are searched, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You cannot just use some kind of background check thing off the internet, or, it has to include that fingerprinted background check. So, if that's the case, then it is up to your program director to determine how those checks are conducted on volunteers. You can't do it through teacher certification because they only that you only go through them when you're paying somebody to do the background check. Okay. So it's up to you as a program director. What we would advise you to do is try to complete the background check through your DHR, your local DHR office. We feel like almost all local DHRs will probably be willing to do this for you, but we don't have a specific like agreement with DHR or anything for them to do these background checks. So we don't want to say, yes, go to your local DHR and they'll do it for you. We can't really say that, but we can strongly advise you for that to be your first option, is to go to your local DHR, because they do have laws and rules in place for child care facilities, and that would be kind of what you guys would be considered, and for providing background checks to those. And so that's what I would recommend that you try to do first, is go through your local DHR. The other good thing about going through your local DHR is that if they do it, then they're going to be the ones that's going to look at those background check results and say, yes, this person is safe to be around kids, or no, this person is not safe to be around kids. They'll make that determination for you, and you'll be able to, it'll be on someone else to make that decision. If you don't go through your local DHR, you can go through your local sheriff's office or police department to have these background checks done. The problem with that one is it's then going to fall on the program director to look at the results of that background check and determine whether that person is considered safe to be around students. Maybe they have some criminal record. Maybe they have, minor things on their criminal record, or they just have things on their criminal record, period. And it's going to be on you to determine whether the items that are on their criminal record, whether those items mean that person is not safe to be around students or not. And so there are some links here that take you to the DHR website and some other governmental websites that give you a list of disqualifying crimes, that if you see these particular crimes on someone's background check, then that should be an automatic no, this person is not safe to be around kids. And so again, this presentation will be provided to you and you'll have access to these links, but it tells you in here at these links what things for you to look for. And if this person has a criminal history and you're seeing these types of items on their criminal history, then no, you do not need to hire this person to be around students, or you don't need to allow this volunteer to help with your program or come to your school and work with these students. I see a question. How old should the background check be? So it needs to be done, I would say a yearly process, but once you've done it, like once you're in the T-cert, for those who are doing the teacher certification, once they're in there, it's not like they have to continue to go back and have it done year to year. You just need to be able to show that you have a cleared background check. Now, for those of you who are going through DHR or going through your local sheriff's department, I actually haven't thought about the answer to that question, to be honest with you. I was, my first thing wants to say yearly, but then on the flip side of that, I don't necessarily, if you've hired somebody 1 year, do you have to make them go back and do that background check every year? I would say no. But, you know, let me think about that one. Let me think about if we do need to have some sort of limit on that, how often this needs to be done or how recent it should be done. Yeah, I know. Yeah. So the comment was there's some in teacher cert that are at least 10 to 15 years old, and that is true. Um, so yeah, right now I'm hesitant to give you a certain number of years. Um, it may be, your programs are 5-year programs, and so as long as you have, it may be that we say that as long as you have where you can print out that they've had a cleared background check during the course of this program, then that's good enough. But let me get back to you guys about that. For now, we're just going to say you have to just do it the one time. But let me reach out to some different leadership here at the state and see if we want to have some sort of requirement that it needs to be done every 5 years or every 3 years or what. I don't think it's going to be something that you would have to do every year. Now, I will say this, I would highly recommend that if you hire somebody, you get their cleared background check, but something happens that you're concerned about, like you hear that there was some sort of domestic violence situation that happened with that person, or maybe a DUI or something to that effect, then that is definitely something that you would need to revisit. Um, just be mindful, be careful, you know, try to be mindful of the people that work for you. And if something like that pops up, if you know that that person was arrested over the weekend for something, then that might be when you need to, run another background check or do something to find out exactly what happened. And if whatever happened, make sure that whatever happened wasn't something that could potentially make that person unsafe to be around your students. Okay, let me go ahead and say this though. This requirement does not apply to volunteers who are just there to make like a one-time supervised appearance to a group of students. So, or that are there attending a supervised parent and family engagement activity. So this isn't going to apply to like a parent that's coming, in the evening to do a parent family engagement activity. It wouldn't apply to like a local dentist that's going to come one day and talk to a group of kids about teeth health, how to brush their teeth, and that sort of thing. It doesn't apply to those type of people. This directive here really applies to any unpaid volunteers who work directly with students on a one-on-one basis or in a small group basis where they could potentially be left alone with a student at any point during a program. So that's really what this applies to. Typically, if you have a speaker that's just coming in to talk to a group of students, they're not going to be alone with those kids. You're going to have other adults in the room. But again, if it's somebody who's coming frequently and they're working one-on-one, even if you have an adult in the room most of the time, there's always those situations where something happens where that adult that's in the room might feel like it's safe to leave that person alone with those kids, and it may not be. So it's better to be safe than sorry, right? It's always better to be overly protective of our students than to not be protective enough of them. So just keep that in mind. There are a couple, or there is so far there's one exception to this background check requirement, and it may not actually apply to this coming school year. I'm not exactly sure yet. But after this came out this past year, we were reached out to by a program called Al's Pals, which is ran through the University of Alabama. The university in this situation, the University of Alabama is a paid vendor. So technically the people that work for that organization should have to do the fingerprinted background check. But the way it works is that this program provides college students, it actually has college students who need volunteer hours. Those college students do have a background check done, but it's not the fingerprinted version. And they come and provide tutoring to 21st century students in programs that are near their area. And it's like hundreds of them. It's not just, 10 college students that are doing this. It's like several hundred college students that are going out to local schools and doing this tutoring program. And so they reached out to us and explained that, these students had already paid for a background check, like a $35 background check that did not include the fingerprinting. And they asked if we could be flexible in any kind of way because they didn't want to have to turn around and tell those students that they had to go back and take and do a different background check with the fingerprinting that I think it costs, $50 to $60, something like that. It's more expensive. But they said that they asked if they could do that because they said that it's always made very clear to the college students, the staff of the university, and the staff at the 21st Century Center that those college students, were never to be left alone with one or more 21st century students. That was written into their contract. And that it was part of the training for both the college students and the people who, the staff of the 21st Century Center, that they are to never leave those kids alone with them. And we took that into consideration. And after speaking with Dr. Killingsworth, we decided that that would be okay because these are college students, they're much younger. They would probably be less likely to be left alone by an adult anyway with those students. And so we did go ahead and agree to allow that to continue with the current background checks that those students had. Now, I know that last time I spoke with the University of Alabama, they were thinking about changing the background check that they did to the fingerprinted one, especially since a lot of the students who do this program end up becoming teachers anyway, and they're going to have that done at some point anyway. It would actually save them money in the long run to go ahead and have the fingerprint background check done. And so, but I don't know if they've established that for this coming school year or not. I know they were thinking about it, but I don't know if they have. Okay, it may have been covered already, but what about current high school student volunteers like Beta Club? Okay, so thank you for bringing this. A great question. It was mentioned in one of the slides, but I did not expand on that. So if the student is still in high school, they do not have to have this background check because they're still considered public school students or a part of the public school. And they already could potentially, on a bus or something like that, be in contact with the students in your program. So no, you do not have to do the background check for if you have older kids that are within your LEA or within an LEA that are still public school students working with your program. No, they do not have to have the background check done. Now, once they graduate from high school, at that point forward, then yes, if they're going to work directly with students, they have to have that background check done. But as long as they're still a member of that community school, then no, they don't have to have that done. Okay. So here is the required background check documentation. All 21st Century site coordinators and program directors must sign the Alabama 21st Century Acknowledgement of Compliance with Fingerprinting and Background Check Requirement Form. I know that's a really long title there, but because this was not written into the RFA, we did not want anyone to be able to go back and say, well, that wasn't in the RFA, so that's why we didn't do our fingerprinting background checks. And so this form has been created to kind of combat that, and so that it needs to be signed by all site coordinators and program directors, acknowledging that they know that they're supposed to have fingerprinted background checks for anybody who works with students in their program. That form was emailed out to you guys a few weeks ago when I first sent an email, but of course it was I believe only at the time I only had your program director contact information. And so it would have been sent to the program directors, but maybe not necessarily unless they forwarded it. It probably was not sent to the site coordinators. And so we'll make sure that you guys have access to that form. I don't have a link of it in the presentation at this time, but I will make a note really quick to put that in there before I send it out. Give me just a second. Okay. All right. Put a reminder. Okay, so I'll make sure that's included when this is sent to you guys. We ask that you maintain a list of all individuals that work at your site. That includes staff, high school graduates, again, graduates, that's anybody who's already graduated from high school, university or college students, volunteers, and vendors. And then with that list, we ask that you maintain documentation that each of the individuals who's been paid with 21st Century funds has a status of cleared in the Alabama Teacher Certification Portal or the AIM portal that Jennifer talked about earlier. You should just be able to print that directly from the Teacher Certification Portal. And put that into a file. So we ask that each site coordinator have a copy for all applicable individuals that work with their site, and that the program director should have a copy for all individuals that work at all of their sites. So if you're a program director and you have multiple sites, you should have a copy of this background check for all of the staff at all the different sites that you work with. We also ask that you maintain documentation that each adult volunteer who works directly with students has undergone the required background checks and has a cleared status from either DHR or has been deemed to have a clear background check from the program director. Okay. Again, we expect the site coordinator to have a copy of that background check information at their site. And we expect the program director to have a copy of that documentation at their office as well. So at any time, your technical assistant may come, they actually have been instructed that when they come and do site visits, they're supposed to ask to see this for all of your paid staff, all of your volunteers, and all of the vendors who work directly with students. Let me see, I'm not sure if I put this in there or not, but I don't think I included this, but let me go ahead and verbally say this. You can charge the grant the cost of these background checks. That is something that you can apply to the grant. However, I would just think about whether it's necessary or not, because typically when you just think about it this way, typically when you hire somebody to work for a program, that's like, or to work for a school, that's something that they typically have to pay for out of pocket to come work for the school system. And so you should really follow the same guidelines that your LEA establishes for that. If your LEA says that that's not a cost that should be paid for by the employee, then that's what I would suggest that you do for your 21st Century program as well. Vendors, though, they need to pay for that themselves as well. You're paying them to provide a service. They need to pay for their own background check. Now, a volunteer, if you really feel like that volunteer is a tremendous asset to your 21st Century program, and they can't afford, maybe they're an elderly person, a retired person who may be on a limited budget. If you want to pay for them to have that background check done, then feel free to go ahead and do that. It is an allowable cost and that you can apply to the grant. Again, just use your own judgment as to whether that's something that you should pay for or whether it should be paid for by the employee. Because it can add up, but I would not expect you to pay for it for any of your vendors. And again, whether you want to pay for it for paid staff or not, that is up to you. I would just take that on a need basis on, whether that staff member really needs you to pay for it for them or not. Okay, this last part, individuals that do not have a current and clear background check that meets the requirements outlined in this presentation, including vendors, are not allowed to provide services until cleared. So hopefully you can get all of these background checks done before the school year begins, and this shouldn't be an issue for you, but we did have to have, this past year when this came up and we realized that some sites were not doing the proper background check, we had to have a couple of sites even closed down for a period of time. I don't think they actually had to close. They ended up having enough staff who had the correct background checks to be able to stay open, but they did have to limit services from vendors until those vendors could go and have that background check done. if your vendors question this, I'm happy to talk to them. This is something I'm passionate about. I'm happy to talk to them about this. This came up at ACEA last year, and it was kind of a big, there was a big stink made about it from some people who were there, because it was something that had never been required of them in the past. But all you can say is if someone questions this, that it is our responsibility to make sure that the students that we serve are safe, and we would much rather be overly protective than not protective enough. And if they're not willing to have that done, then there's always somebody, we can hire to work with those kids that hopefully would be willing to have that done. It's just, to me, it's a giant red flag if someone doesn't want to have this done. Yes, it's a cost. Yes, it's a pain to go through, but it is a requirement in order to keep our kids safe and make sure that the adults that are working with them are going to be safe to be around. Y'all, there's actually websites out there. I hate to even put this out there, but there's sites out there where people can go. I guess it's on the dark web. I don't know. I haven't ever been to one of these sites, but I've been told there's sites where you can go and look up school systems that have less aggressive or less strenuous background checks, so that these criminals, these people who should not be around children, can find school systems that they can go work with that aren't going to do those extensive background checks. So we don't want to be one of those. We want to make sure that we're doing whatever we can do to make sure that our kids are safe and are around individuals who are safe to be around students. All right, any questions about any other questions I haven't seen anything pop up, but does anyone have any questions about these background checks? Okay, I'm going to keep moving, but if you think of a question, feel free to put it in the chat. All right, let's talk about the types of things that are allowed for you to spend money on with 21st century funds. I'm going to go through these. If you have any questions that pop up, please let us know. I know a lot of you have already planned your activities in your RFA. However, you can always add to those activities. And so I just want to make sure that I go over all of these authorized activities in case, in case you want to question what is allowed and what's not. Of course, any kind of academic enrichment activities are allowed as in your program, but we do like to see it when you're taking these academic activities and having it where the kids are actually applying some sort of knowledge and skills that they're learning during the day to something that's fun and interactive and project focused. We love to see it when the 21st century programs are kind of approaching their academic activities as almost like a project-based learning type situation. It shouldn't be, your program should not just be a babysitting service, and it shouldn't just be a tutoring service, right? It shouldn't just be a place where they come and get homework help. Yes, can homework help be part of the activities you're providing? Absolutely. But should it make up most of your afternoon program? Absolutely not. That's not fun for the kids. That's not fun for you. It really should be some sort of enrichment learning activity that takes what they're learning during the school day and enables them to apply it to some kind of real life experience, some kind of hands-on activity. That's what I really love to see. But that's what we encourage you to do. You can also use funds to have programs that build skills in science, technology, engineering, and math. Those are your STEM. You can have computer science, engineering design, anything that fosters any kind of innovation or allows the kids, again, to have those hands-on experiences that just builds that content knowledge in their head. That is super important for you to include into your programs. You can have academic remediation or tutoring or homework help, which of course specifically targets students' academic needs. Again, I would prefer for this not to be what your entire afternoon is made up of. But of course, if you need to have 30 minutes a day where you have students working on their homework, That is absolutely acceptable because, because they're in your program late in the evening, maybe they don't have time to do homework once they get home. So if that needs to be part of your program, absolutely do that. Just try not to make it your entire program. You can have literacy education programs. Those can include financial literacy programs or environmental literacy programs. So what I mean by that is you could, your financial literacy, you could teach kids how to do a budget. You could have someone from the local bank come in and talk to the kids about, what, or maybe your older students or young adults about opening a bank account, how to do a budget, talk to them about credit cards, things like that, the traps and interest rates and things of that nature. But you could also do environmental literacy where you have like a focus on the environment, on um, recycling, that sort of thing. That could be part of your literacy education program. You can have recreational programs that support a healthy and active lifestyle, including nutrition education. You can have regular structured physical activity programs, anything that promotes social skills, teamwork, leadership, competition, and discipline. So, you could have tennis classes, you could have soccer, any of these types of things. Now, this doesn't need to be your regular school program. Like, you don't need to have football practice and call it 21st century, or cheerleading practice and call it a 21st century program. It does need to be kind of something that stands on its own and not part of that regular program. Like, for example, if you were doing your cheerleading activity during that time, could cheerleading be part of your 21st century program? Absolutely. Does it need to be, does your 21st century program need to be the time when the cheerleaders are meeting and practicing for their routine for the football game that's coming up this weekend? No, that's not necessarily what this should be about. Is it a way to fund your cheerleaders? No, it's not a way to fund your cheerleaders. So think about it that way. But can you have those physical activity programs? Yes, you can. And it's very encouraged for you to do so. That would fit into that holistic health and wellness place that you're expected to provide to those kids. You can have activities for limited English proficient students. So anything, if you have a large EL population, you could have some activities that emphasizes language skills and academic achievement for those students. You can have any kind of well-rounded education activity that can include activities that enable students to be eligible for credit recovery or attainment. So you can, especially for your older students, your high school programs, you can have some credit recovery programs in your afternoon. You can also do some CTE type programming in after school as part of your 21st century program. You can have programs that provide assistance to students who have been truant, suspended, or expelled to allow students to improve their academic achievement. So you could, if you have a large population of kids who fall into this category, you could have something specific for them to try to help them get caught up in their classwork, get some of that credit recovery back, that type of thing. You could have some behavior type programs to help assist with that. With maybe a behavior interventionist, you can definitely, it's encouraged for you to have activities for those students. You can have drug and violence prevention activities. You can have counseling. You can have character education programs. All of those would, again, fall into that holistic health and wellness that you're expected to provide those goals that you're supposed to have for your program. You can have activities targeting adult family members to help them acquire a knowledge or a skill meant to be imparted through participation in the service or activity. So in other words, you can have activities that just are for adult family members of your students. So you could have something like a GED class. You could have a class teaching them how to develop a resume. You could do classes on effective parenting strategies or family literacy strategies. You could teach your parents how to read to their kids and that sort of thing. So you can have specific classes or courses that are for the family members of the students that you're serving. And those actually can occur during the school day if they need to. So they could be done in the evenings or in the mornings, but they can, if it's for a family member, if it's for someone other than a student who should be in school, then you can do that activity during the school day if you need to. You can do programs that promote parental involvement. So, and that is an actual, we expect to see that. We expect to see some parental involvement activities designed to engage parents more actively to support their children's educational attainment. So, do those STEM nights, the art nights, have a play where they come and watch a dance. It could be a dance recital, music program, anything like that, where you've got your parents coming in to see the work that you're doing with their students is a fantastic thing. We expect you to do community service or service learning programs or youth leadership programs. This is where you are going to do some sort of service task, preferably designed and performed by the students. So I know that a lot of you, typically what we expect is for you to have your students determine what your service learning program is going to be or service learning activity is going to be. But we understand that for the process of the RFA, we asked for you to go ahead and put what your plans were going to be for that for your first year. But in future years, we encourage you to try to give the children a voice in what they want to do as far as their service learning activities. And you can still give them a voice now. Let's say that you said that you were going, as part of your service learning activity, you were going to work with a local nursing home. But you could continue to do that. That could be your service learning activity, but you could let the kids decide what they want to do. Do they want to go read to the elderly? Do they want to create Christmas cards? Do they want to do some sort of arts and craft activity? You know, let the kids come up with the activities that they're actually going to be doing, working with that nursing home or the people in that nursing home. So try to make it more of a student-led task, but again, we understand that you had to kind of come up with some things ahead of time for the purpose of your RFA, but really we want to see it where the students have a voice in this, and they're thinking about we want to see it where the kids are actually thinking about the needs of their community, and that you're facilitating them planning a community service or service learning project for their community. You want to give them the opportunities to acquire those values, the knowledge and skills, and those leadership skills that are all involved in those community service projects. You can have cultural programs, you can have art programs, you can have instructional or educational enrichment activities that involve weapons. This is new this year. We talked about this in the RFA, but you can have, for example, an archery class, a hunting or shooting sports class, or culinary arts, where they have to maybe use knives. However, just keep in mind that if you are doing anything with a weapon, no weapons are allowed on school property, so it would need to take place outside of a school campus. So let's say I'm big in, I grew up, my dad actually used to build bows. So I used to shoot competition archery. So I think that's fantastic. If you want to do an archery program, do an archery program, but you may have some background knowledge and things like that that occur at your 21st century site. But then when you go to actually shoot the bows, you probably need to go to some sort of shooting range or something to that effect off of school property in order for that to be allowable. You would not want anyone bringing any kind of weapon on school property. It would need to take place outside of the school campus. Okay. You can do pre-approved field trips. We've already talked about those. You can have career or job training programs that partner with in-demand fields of the local workforce or build career competencies. So you could work with your CTE program at your school and think of ways that you can incorporate some sort of career or job training or allow students to get some sort of certification. I know at a recent national conference I went to with other states, One gentleman was saying that they have a class for their high school students that teach them how to, it gives them a certification to drive the school bus. They were having a situation in their LEA where they were having a hard time finding bus drivers, and they incorporated this into their 21st century after school program where their older students were able to get certified to drive the school bus, which gave those students an extra way to make money, and it gave the school system people to help drive the school bus every day. So whether I think that's a great idea or not, I don't know. That's kind of scary to me to think about a teenager driving a school bus, but it's just an example of something that you could do with your after school programming or summer programming. You can have elective high school courses that are not required by the SDE for graduation, but can help earn credit towards high school graduation during your 21st century program. So again, make sure that if you're going to offer a course or course recovery during your 21st century program, it needs to be something that's an elective that's not required by the SDE, because those classes that are required for graduation, that has to be paid for. That can't be paid for with 21st century funds. That would be considered supplanting. You would have to use local funds to pay for that. So that wouldn't necessarily be part of your 21st century program. But you could offer some elective courses that could go towards high school credit for graduation. It's just not one of those required courses that's required by the State Department. And then finally, you can do professional development opportunities for your staff that are tied to 21st century content. We highly encourage this and are really pushing this year. In the past, we see a lot of situations where mostly the administrative staff gets the professional development, but we really would like to see that turned around to where the staff that works with the students are getting more professional development. There is a requirement for professional development for staff that we will talk about at some point, but I can go ahead and bring it up. That's in the I believe it's in the RFA, that all site coordinators are supposed to provide at least 10 hours of professional development to their staff. That could occur online, it could occur during staff meetings and that sort of thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be something where they go to a conference or a training outside of the 21st century program, but we encourage it. We really would like to see more of your staff that works with students go to ACEA, go to that conference. We're really going to, I'm super excited that this year it's really going to focus more on best practices with after school programming and summer programming. And we just want to make sure that the people who are working with the students are equipped to do so in the best way possible. And so we highly encourage you to use those professional development funds to give those staff opportunities to learn more about what they should be doing in an after school program. Okay, let's talk about unauthorized activities. And again, it's 2:45. We're a little over halfway through our presentation. If you need to step away to go to the restroom or something, please feel free to do so. I'm just going to keep running my mouth until I'm done or until time runs out. If you have questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. All right, so these are things that you cannot use 21st century funds for. You cannot use them to support activities that occur during the normal school hours unless those activities are targeting the adult family members of those participating students that we talked about earlier. So if you're doing a GED class for family members of the students, you could do that during normal school hours, but that would be the only time that something like that would be allowed. You cannot support any activities that occur during the school day with 21st century funds. Again, typically you can't purchase food or snacks with 21st century funds, and except for under certain circumstances, which we talked about earlier in this presentation, unless it's part of a approved cooking class or cooking demonstration. What I would say for this, guys, is if you are doing this, if you do plan on doing some sort of nutritional activities with your students, please make sure that when you do your budget, your 21st century budget, that is written in there somewhere. that you are doing that type of program, that, it doesn't have to be specific. You can just put, it would be included in your materials and supplies category, and you would just need to put material. So you could put something to this effect. You could say something like, these funds will be used to purchase materials, supplies, and food needed for the cooking class, for a cooking class or cooking demonstration or health nutrition lesson. Put that in there. And the reason why I'm saying to put it in there is because we specifically have asked accounting to look for food purchases in your expenditure reports and to question them if you don't have something written in your budget about providing some sort of enrichment activity, or if we've told them also these other options where you may be able to purchase food in the case of summer programming. But we need to make sure that narrative is in your budget so that they are aware that, yes, this is something that is allowable. So just make sure, and again, that's something that we will reach out to you guys about if we see, as we're checking through your budgets, if we see that something needs to be reworded or written a different way, we will be reaching out to you very soon about that. Okay, you cannot use, again, we talked about this last week. You're not supposed to use 21st century funds to cover costs associated with field trips or other activities whose sole or primary purpose is entertainment, such as trips to amusement parks or skating rinks or jump parks or something like that. Again, please try not to take advantage of the fact that we're still trying to approve these types of things if we can. Make sure that if you're going to take your students to a place that's typically a place that's solely based on entertainment, that you really do have a strong lesson plan to go with that, and that you really do plan to turn around and teach those kids something that's going to have some sort of product at the end of it. Don't request to go to a jump park and say you're teaching the kids about gravity and that's it, right? Don't ask to rent a inflatable where it has water, like a water slide type of inflatable, and tell me you're going to teach the kids about water. I've seen that. Okay. That's not good enough. So be mindful that what you're spending the 21st century funds are on, it has an obvious educational tie to it, especially if it's something that typically is purchased for entertainment purposes. Because that's where we're going to end up getting in trouble if we get audited by the feds, which could happen at any time. I don't think the 21st Century State Program has been audited by the feds in quite some time, so we could be next. And I would hate for us to get a finding for that sort of thing. So I want to be able to make sure that if I'm asked about a specific field trip that we approved, that I can say, yes, they had a fantastic lesson plan that went with this. This is what the kids do. Here's pictures of the kids doing it. You know what I mean? Just, I want to make sure that we have all of our I's dotted and our T's crossed so that nobody gets in trouble, and that you're still able to provide these fun activities for your students, but there is some learning involved. Okay. So this next one, is, I forgot that this is a potential change that's coming up. So anyway, it says you cannot use 21st century funds to provide gift cards, gift certificates, or other monetary incentives for students. And that does still apply as far as the monetary incentive goes. There may be certain circumstances where you can now purchase small incentives for students. There's some new federal regulations in Edgar that does say that you can purchase some incentives for students as long as they're very minor and very reasonable. But this would not be any kind of monetary incentive. So you shouldn't be purchasing any kind of gift card or gift certificate or giving them $5 or anything like that for doing a job well done, unless you're having those things donated by your community. If you have a business that wants to donate a $25 gift certificate for some of the kids that made straight A's, absolutely, that's fine. You just can't use 21st century funds for that. What you can do now that was frowned upon in the past is you can spend 21st century funds on some minor incentives for students that are not monetary. So for example, you could purchase it to buy like the little ribbons, the A honor roll ribbon type thing. Another thing that we've seen sites want to do is do, for example, like tokens for a book vending machine. They want to purchase a book vending machine, and then once the kids have read so many books, they get a token. They can go put that token in the book vending machine, and they get a book that they get to take home and keep. Purchasing that vending machine may not be allowable because that may actually be not necessarily considered reasonable or necessary for with 21st century funds, because you can easily just hand the kids a book. But giving the kid the book part would be, the books themselves, is if they're a reward, that could be an allowable activity. So if you are uncertain about what would be allowable and would not be allowable, please reach out to us and just get verification to make sure it's okay. But again, no kind of monetary incentives. We're not giving kids money, not giving them gift cards or gift certificates, but you can give them trinkets as incentives, which has not been allowed in the past. You cannot use 21st century funds to provide incentives for staff, such as bonuses or awards or a staff luncheon or anything like that. So that is still a no. No incentives for staff. You cannot use 21st century funds to provide or support religious activities. And so I don't think I do, but if I have any CBOs that are actually faith-based organizations, you would need to be careful about the items that you purchase with your 21st century funds, that they are not religious based. And so, you couldn't purchase like a religious based textbook or something like that with 21st century funds. Faith-based organizations can have a 21st century grant. It's just the items they purchase with that money needs to be secular and not religious. Same thing with like a conference. If you wanted to go to a religious conference, those do exist out there that have secular activities. There might be like a private school conference, for example, that offers some sessions that are religious based and some sessions that are really more academic based, and you could attend the academic based items and pay for that, I guess, if it really applied to after school programming. But that would just, it would just be the portion of the conference that you're going to that is not religious based. You cannot cover costs associated with any kind of marketing activities, but this does not include the recruitment of student participants. So, for example, if you want to make flyers, that's fine. If you want to put an advertisement in the local paper about the 21st century program, that would be fine. What you could not do, though, is create, you wouldn't be able to use like 21st century funds to create, have pins made with your program logo on it, or t-shirts made with your logo on it that would just be for the purpose of getting kids to come, or trying to promote your program. You would not be able to use it for like your 21st century website. We've had some programs in the past who've tried to, especially like a CBO, have tried to charge the 21st century program for part of that CBO's website because they said they were marketing on the website for the 21st century program, but that's not an allowed expense. And, that would not be an allowable activity. You cannot use 21st century funds to cover costs associated with any type of grant writing or fundraising activity. So if you wanted to do a fundraising activity, you could not put 21st century funds towards that, those fundraising activities. You also, when it comes time to write for the grant again, you cannot pay somebody to help write your grant with 21st century funds. That would not be allowed. Okay, a few more of these. You cannot use them to subgrant to another agency or entity to operate your 21st century program. So again, you're not allowed to subgrant these funds. Now, can you hire people to come in and be teachers and help with your program? Yes, you can. That can be a contracted service. You could definitely hire a company to come in and help with tutoring, or to help be a mentorship type program, or school counselor, come and serve as counselors or nurses or something like that. That's not the same thing as being a subgranting. You're not paying someone, another company or another organization to run your 21st century program. You're contracting for some services that go towards the program that you're running. So that's okay. You just can't subgrant out. You cannot use 21st century funds to purchase a bus or any vehicle. So this usually typically applies to CBOs. Sometimes, they come to us and say, hey, it would be cheaper for us just to buy a van than to rent one. But that is not an allowed expense. So you cannot purchase buses or vans or anything like that. And since it's something that we're talking about, we really prefer, if you're going to even rent a bus or vehicle, that we do it from your local education agency, because we know that those are safe. Or that you purchase, like for a field trip, especially a long distance field trip, you can definitely you can rent a charter bus or something like that. But we would not want to see you like on your own rent a bus to transport kids back and forth, especially like a CBO or something like that. That would not be that would be frowned upon, because not to say absolutely that's not allowable, but there would be all kinds of hoops and things you would have to jump through regarding safety measures and all that kind of stuff. It's just typically much easier to contract any of your travel, any kind of bus rentals or anything like that, through the LEA or a charter bus company. You cannot use 21st century funds to purchase, construct, or renovate a building. Okay, so now this is one. Okay, somebody has a question about this one. See, it says not to construct or renovate a building, but what if for the community service project, the students want to clean up and fix some of the local park buildings, such as bathrooms or playground equipment? So no, that would not be an allowable activity. Now, they can help clean it up. Absolutely. If you want to get kids out there with trash bags and gloves and them help clean up, or if you want to buy paint and help them, them go out and paint a building to make it look nicer or something like that, that would be fine. But you could not do anything that would be considered a renovation or construction type project. So you wouldn't necessarily be able to fix a swing set, or purchase some sort of new playground equipment, or make some sort of renovation to a building, or add a new air conditioner to the bathroom or something like that. No, that would not be allowed. And that applies to the community service project, but it would also apply to a school or something like that. So you couldn't use 21st century funds to say, repave the parking lot, because it's used for parents to drop off and pick up kids in the afternoon. You couldn't justify that. Now, I'm going to say a minute ago. Okay, so this also kind of applies to when you want to purchase large ticket items. Please keep in mind that we want you to be very innovative with what you purchase with your funds. We want to see you purchase some of those outside of the box items, but if it requires some sort of construction in order to make that item work, typically we're supposed to say no to it. So if you have to install something like a projector in the ceiling or something like that, then typically it's a no. We want you to use something that is that can easily be moved from one place to another. And I don't know that I've mentioned this yet, but please understand that these funds are supposed to be used for objects that are just for the 21st century program and just to be used by 21st century kids. And if at the end of this grant, you don't get the grant again, and there's certain things that have to be done with the materials and supplies that you purchase with this 21st century funds. They don't belong to the school. At that point, there's certain guidelines that have to be followed about what happens to that equipment. So technically, and this is probably something really I should talk about another day, but I'm just going to go ahead and mention it. Technically, what's supposed to happen to that equipment is it can stay at the school if it's being used for the purpose that it was purchased for. So if that school is going to continue to have an after-school program, then that equipment can stay at the school for that after-school program. If they're not going to continue to have an after-school program, it says in the federal regulations that the next option is that that equipment is supposed to be moved to another 21st century site within that LEA. So let's say you don't get the grant, but another school in your LEA does get it. Technically, if you're not going to have an after-school program anymore because you're not getting the funding anymore, then you're supposed to take all of that equipment, everything that was purchased for 21st century, and move it to that new school, okay, to that other school that did get the grant. So that's supposed to be the first option. If there isn't another school in the LEA that has a 21st century grant, then you can give the equipment, it can remain at the school to be used with the Title I program, either at the school that the equipment is currently at or at another Title I school that's in the LEA. So that's how it has to be handled. So anytime you buy something, it has to be able to be moved easily to another location if needed. I'll answer your question in just one second. Let me finish my thought here. So if I'm going to have to, you can't use 21st century funds to renovate or to add like electrical plugs for computers or anything like that, because that's not something that could easily be moved from one site to another. Now, we've had some people talk about having a greenhouse, and I could see where that may fall under this, but what we tell people is that with the situation with a greenhouse is if it's been approved for you to purchase a greenhouse with 21st century funds, it has to be a structure that can be easily moved from one location to another. You cannot use 21st century funds to like put down a concrete pad for that greenhouse. It needs to be some sort of very easily, built building that can be moved to another location if the 21st century program does not continue, and that needs to be done. Okay. So those are all things, anytime you want to, like, for another example, there's these Lou interactive systems that a lot of our 21st century sites have been asking for. They have a version that has to be mounted, and they have a version that is movable, that is mobile. We always tell everybody buy the mobile version. It doesn't need to be something that's mounted and that would have to be, taken down and to be moved. So please be careful about that kind of thing. Okay, so the question is, would a little free library be an allowable service project? Or would materials have to be donated since it could be considered construction? So let me think about this. I'm assuming what you mean by that is like a little freestanding wooden structure that kids or that community members could go to and borrow a book out of, and they bring it back. I'm assuming that's kind of what you mean. And I would say that depends. Okay. So, yeah, so it would definitely need to be something that could be moved, but I could also potentially see you turn that into a project where the actual little wooden structure is built by the students under the leadership of someone who knows what they're doing with power tools, of course. I could see where you could turn it into kind of a woodworking activity for the students to build the structure. Um, and then, you know, I could see where you could buy the books to put into it. Of course, um, you would just want to be careful that if that's something that you're doing, that you have some sort of checks and balances. It needs to be something that's preferably supposed to be returned and borrowed and that sort of thing. You're really not supposed, even if it's for a service learning project, you're really not just supposed to spend 21st century funds on items for the community. So for example, let me give you an example, a different example. We had one site this past year whose learning service their learning service project, what they wanted to do is it's an area that tends to have a lot of really bad weather, like tornado alley type situation. And they wanted to build storm kits for the community. And they wanted to purchase a weather radio to put into the kit, like a first aid kit to put into the kits. And then they wanted to make like 30 or 50 kits and then distribute them to the community as their service learning project. Unfortunately, I had to say no to that because that's really you taking 21st century funds and spending it on the community instead of spending it on the kids. Now, what I did say was you could use for that situation, they could use 21st century funds maybe to create like pamphlets about safety where the kids create, you know, a weather safety pamphlet or something. They could use the funds to have maybe some bookshelves or something where they're going to store items that were donated by the community. Um, Another example would be like a food bank. Some of our sites want to do like a food bank. You can't purchase food for the food bank um, if that's your service learning project. You can have that food donated by the community, but what you could do is use 21st century funds to purchase like shelving to put the food on, storage containers to put the food in, that sort of thing. So it just depends on the situation. You can't really use those funds to purchase things for the community. Those are typically things you would have donated, but I could see in the case of this little free library where maybe you could purchase wood, have it be a class, like a group project to build the little building, um, and then maybe have books donated by the local library, or maybe it could be a great way to. I could see you doing this. I could see you taking some of your older books from your school, replacing them with 21st. Well, no, I don't want to say that. Because if you buy something, it's supposed to be for the 21st century kids. So I was about to say you could replace those books with 21st century funds and then use the older books in your little library. But um, typically you'd probably want to have those books donated or something like that. It's all just kind of depends on the situation. But if you have questions, if you have things like that you're just not sure about whether it's considered allowable or not, please just reach out and ask, and we will definitely take care of that, and answer that for you. So Venetia said their programs created mobile libraries by adding shelving to a cart and filled them with books. So yeah, that's great. It's a great thing. Okay. Okay, this last bullet is you're not supposed to use 21st century funds to purchase clothing for employees or students. There is an exception to this with the purchase of t-shirts with the 21st century program. Again, and this would be for field trip purposes for safety. Again, if you're going to do this, the 21st century program name or logo has to be the main logo, the dominating graphic on the t-shirt. and that shirt needs to remain the property of the program, not sent home with the students. There is an additional exception to this that we allowed this past year. If you are doing some sort of class activity where a certain type of uniform or clothing is needed in order for that activity to be safe, then you can purchase like a classroom set of that uniform or activity. So for example, we had a program that had a pretty extensive dance program in the afternoon. They were an LEA that there was not really any dance studio in the community. If there was, it was very expensive and not very feasible for a lot of families to be able to afford for their students to go to that program. And so they did do a dance program. And they were wanting to spend quite an extensive amount of money on, like, dance clothing and shoes and things like that. And so we had to go back and say no, um, because it was more of like cute outfits for a recital that they were wanting to purchase with the 21st Century Funds, and that would not be considered reasonable or necessary. But what I did go back and allow them to do is purchase, because of the situation, because of the community, the poverty level of the community and things like that. I did say, okay, you can purchase a leotard for, a classroom set of leotards. You can purchase shoes for the students to use, like ballet shoes or tap shoes or whatever, but it needs to be like a classroom set. It would need to remain, it doesn't need to be something the kids get to keep. It needs to remain the property of the program. Now, as far as leotards go, whether it, more than likely that would not be something that we would make you use from year to year to year. But because of safety and just, that's something that may be harder to keep clean and be used, is kind of like underwear, I guess you would say. You wouldn't want to make kids, share that from year to year to year. But if you have a situation like that, then please reach out and get permission, and we can try to be as flexible as we can with that sort of thing. There may be certain circumstances like that where we can show that it's a justifiable and reasonable expense for you to spend those funds on that item in order for the kids to stay safe in the activity that you're wanting them to do. If you can't do that, then it's probably going to be a no, right? We're not going to buy football uniforms for an entire football program for a school. That's going to be a no. But let's say you're doing a soccer classes in the afternoon, and you need a set of safety equipment for soccer, like the shin pads and that sort of thing. I could see that being a yes, but that's something that can remain at the site and be used by different students from year to year to year. So it's just going to be stuff like that is going to be approved on a case-by-case basis, just depending on what the situation is. But don't just assume that you can buy these things. You definitely, on anything like that, whether you're purchasing clothing, purchasing food, any of those things that typically would not be allowed, even if I've said in a presentation like this, that there might be some exceptions and there might be some situations where it could be allowed, those things have to be approved. You need to get that in writing. I may ask you to submit some sort of proposal, and then we will take that into consideration and approve it on a case-by-case basis. Just remember, anytime we purchase anything, it has to be, whether it's clothing or anything else, it has to be reasonable, necessary, and pre-approved by the ALSDE. So that is something we will take into account. Is this reasonable? Is this something that is what you're wanting to purchase? Can it be done for cheaper? If it can, then we may say, no, you can do this in a cheaper way. Is it necessary? Is this something that you have to have in order for that program to take place and be safe for the kids? That will all be taken into consideration. All right. Any other questions? Okay, hold on. Let's see. Okay, so once a program ends and does not have a new cohort, may the t-shirts be given to the students? Technically they're not supposed to be, but again, technically t-shirts are supposed to remain part of the program. Is somebody going to come and look for those t-shirts in, 2 years after your program has ended? Probably not. Like minor things like that probably would not be looked at. Even if you had to move that equipment from one school to the next, and it's a different school, different name, different colors and things like that, are those t-shirts going to be used at that new school? Probably not. Can you give them to the students? Probably so. Typically, also keep this in mind as well when you're thinking about disposal of things. We tell you guys to use your LEA, your local education agencies, rules and regulations when it comes to disposal of things. And so you follow your own regulations. And so if you determine that there is not a use for those t-shirts anymore, they're got holes in them, they're old, they're worn out, they need to be disposed of, then you can dispose of those t-shirts however you see fit. You just need to make sure that you're following your local policies on things like that. But as long as equipment, when you're thinking about equipment or computers or larger, bigger ticket items, or even like books, even things like library books, or not library, but books that you buy specifically for your program for your kids to read, if they're still in good condition and they can still be used from year to year to year, we expect you to continue to use those items and to follow the procedures at the end of your program that are required, that the feds say you have to do with that, that equipment. So if it's items that are still good and can be used for your program and you don't get the grant and you end up having, another grant that occurs in your LEA, you're not having an after school program, you will be asked to transfer that equipment to that new site. But if it's something that's outdated, you know how computers are. Computers only last a few years before they're outdated and no longer work. And so when it comes to that point, you can use your LEA's disposal procedures to get rid of that equipment, but you do need to make sure that you're keeping, we'll talk about this when we get to inventory, but you do need to make sure that you're keeping record of that anytime you dispose of equipment or get rid of anything and why you got rid of it, so that if you ever are approached, by us or your TA or anything like that saying, hey, 2 years ago you bought 30 laptops, where are those laptops? If one of them got broken or stolen or something like that, you ought to be able to show us where you followed your LEA's procedures to take that off of your inventory, whether you filed a police report if it was stolen, or you went through some sort of disposition procedures to remove that from your inventory. You need to have documentation of that so that there's never any question about funds not, being spent, and then the things you purchased not being able to be found, because that can cause a problem for sure. All right, any questions about allowable or unallowable activities that may have come up in your brains over the last 30 minutes or so, 45 minutes that we've been talking about them? Right. Okay, if you think of anything, put it in the chat. I'm going to move on and let's talk about job descriptions. So this was another thing that I sort of dropped the ball on. I am more than willing to admit it when I make a mistake. And I did definitely do that in the RFA, as far as being really specific about what was expected as far as job descriptions go. It said in here that you were supposed to provide job descriptions when you submitted your applications. And I know I verbally many times said that you were supposed to do this for any positions that you had, but we noticed when after the once the applications were submitted and the application part was closed, we were going through and checking to make sure that everybody had all of the parts of their application, we noticed that a lot of sites did not upload job descriptions for their entire staff. They only did it for the program director and site coordinator, which is what I had given an example of, but that they just used that example and tweaked it and uploaded that, but they did not upload it for any other staff. And so we will make sure in future RFAs to be very explicit about how, even though I only gave examples for 2 positions, you're still supposed to have a job description uploaded in eGap for for every position that you hire for your 21st century program. So we did not hold that against anyone if they did not have all the job descriptions, and we just decided that once you got to this point and you got the grant, we would tackle it at that time. So I sent this out in that same email that I talked to you guys about the fingerprint and background checks, just to kind of get you where you could go ahead and start working on these. But we do need you guys to upload a job description for any staff members that you are hiring with 21st Century Funds, whether it's a teacher, assistant, a student aide, a nurse, a counselor, anything that you plan to spend 21st Century Funds on hiring, you need to have a job description in eGap for those positions. So let's talk first about administrative positions, and this is typically staff who works indirectly with students. Okay, let's talk about the expectations of our program directors. So all 21st century programs must identify one program director to administer their program. This person, when I say one, I do mean one. There should not be more than one program director, even if you have multiple sites, okay? So think about it this is how I like to think of a program director. If I was using an analogy and comparing it to a school system, your program director would be sort of like your superintendent, right? They're over all the schools. So the program director is over all the 21st century sites and is the main decision maker for all the 21st century sites in that LEA. Then you have your site coordinator, and they would be kind of similar to the school principal. They are the ones that run the specific program at that site, okay? So you really you don't have more than one, you never have in an LEA more than one superintendent. You've got one superintendent who is over everything. And so that's the expectation with 21st century. You have one program director who is over all of the sites, okay? This individual will serve as the primary contact for the ALSDE in all matters related to the 21st century program. And here are some of their responsibilities. They should regularly monitor each site. They should visit each site at least weekly. If distance is an issue for that, then please contact your ALSDE specialist to ensure that that you are implementing the educational program described in your approved application, and that you do have procedures for student safety and things like that in place. But we do expect our program directors to be monitoring, to have boots on the ground and to have an eye on what is going on in the different sites and to be visiting those sites regularly, okay? The program director is expected to oversee the completion and timely submission of required reports and data. So if you're late on any of your required reports, we're not coming for the site coordinator typically. Typically, we're coming to the project director and program director, and we're asking them, okay, what is going on? This site hasn't turned in their attendance, or they're not marking their attendance. This site's not turning in their PARs, that sort of thing. So it is the program director's responsibility to make sure that the sites are doing the things that they're supposed to do to stay in compliance with the grant, including reporting their daily attendance, reporting the personal activity reports for their staff, reporting their GEPRA data, and then also making sure that the budget and fiscal matters are being taken care of for all the sites. So making sure that expense reports are being submitted. So like right now, for our current 21st century programs, we have a lot of sites who have not submitted any expense reports for this year. And it is that falls on the program director. That program, even though it's probably the CSFO or some other, the chief financial officer or some other's responsibility to do ES2s for that LEA, it's still the program director's responsibility to be reaching out to that person and saying, hey, we're going to get in trouble if we don't get these expense reports in. They're expected to be turned in monthly. They're expected to be turned in by a certain date. And so that is the job of the program director to make sure that that is being done. Also, it is the job of the program director to make sure that contracts and MOUs are being completed the correct way and being implemented the way they say that they're going to be implemented. It is really important that the services that are provided match the services that the contract says will be provided. And so it's the job of the program director to make sure that that is taking place. All right. More program director job. They must be available to attend all mandatory meetings, trainings, and conferences required by the ALSDE. Okay. We try to let you guys know about those mandatory meetings and trainings as soon as possible. And there are certain times when we can try to be flexible if we fall short and don't give you plenty of advance notice, but we try to do that. If we do have in-person meetings or things like that you're expected to attend, please understand that that if it is a mandatory meeting like today's meeting and like these that are going on, that is a requirement of the grant, and it can count against you for getting future grants if you don't attend the mandatory meetings. The program director is supposed to encourage active collaboration between the 21st Century site and the schools they served, including any private schools, if that's applicable, if you have private schools in your area. So they're responsible for making sure that the program is being planned in collaboration with the actual school day teachers and the schools that you're serving. They need to help make sure that the implementation and data sharing is taking place. So especially for the data sharing thing can be really important, especially for some of your CBOs. CBOs don't have access to PowerSchool and to a lot of the data that is required to be reported for the 21st Century program. And so it's super, super important that that program director has a good relationship with somebody who works with data at the LEA to make sure that you can get the data that you need when it comes time to do that mandatory reporting. This is why we have the LEA sign those assurances and those certifications and assurances, and that the site agreements that you guys had to turn in when you submitted your grant. We want to make sure that the LEAs understand that they're supposed to be working with you guys and providing that data for you. But sometimes that person leaves. Like sometimes, that school principal or that superintendent leaves and goes away, and somebody new comes, and maybe they don't understand the 21st Century program as much, or maybe they're just not as invested. And so it's up to the program director to build those connections and build that relationship and try to make sure that you guys are working together, not only for the best interest of the students, but also so that they understand that they're the one, that the LEA is supposed to be going in and marking kids as 21st Century in PowerSchool, and there's certain data that needs to be pulled at certain times of the year that the LEA is going to have to pull. So it's all on the program director to make sure that those relationships are taking place. And if they're not, if you're a program director and you're doing your best and you're not getting a good reception from the LEA, then please let me know, and I can try to help facilitate that conversation and be an advocate for you so that you can get what you need. I can try to help build that. Not just me, but all of us here at the ALSDE and TPI, we can try to help you guys build those relationships so that you are able to administer the grant the way you're supposed to and get the information, the data that you need to get for the required data that has to be reported. Typically, a program director is a part-time position unless they're directing a large number of 21st century sites. And so I would say 5 or more. If you've got 5 or more sites, then I could see this potentially being a full-time position, but typically it is a part-time position if it's less sites than that. And time spent working on 21st century must be separate from when the employee is being paid to perform their other duties, and they may not exceed 8 hours a day. So, especially for LEAs, a lot of times the program director is maybe works for federal programs or works at the central office in another capacity. That being the program director for the after school program is just a portion of their job. And if that is the case, then you just need to be very careful that you're keeping up with your PARs for your different funding sources that are paying you. So let's say that you're the federal programs director and you're the program director for 21st century. Well, you need to be keeping up with the hours that you're spending working on 21st century and the hours that you're spending working on your other federal program director duties separately, so that nobody can ever consider or can say that you're double dipping or that you're being paid by 2 different funding sources at the same time, or that you're being paid from one funding source but doing the work of another one. So you just want to make sure you're careful about that kind of thing. Either way, you whatever you are paid, it should not exceed 8 hours a day. And please be mindful of this in your budgets. This is one of my big pet peeves. One of the very first things that I do when I look at your budgets is I look at the salary for the program directors and the site coordinators especially. And sometimes I don't know if it's just people thinking that they'll come back later and do a budget revision or what, but they'll put into their budget narrative that they're paying their program director a lump sum, and then maybe say what their hourly rate is. But then when I go and calculate how many hours, if that person is, let's just give an example. If you're saying you're going to pay that program director $15,000 during the academic year and they're being paid $20 an hour, I go and calculate how many hours, $20 an hour, how many hours that ends up calculating to. And if it ends up being more than 8 hours a day, which happens a lot, or it ends up being excessive over the program hours, then I'm going to send that back, even though I understand that when it comes down to it, you have to submit your PARs and you're more than likely not going to be paid for more than 8 hours a day. However, you're tying up your budget, you're tying up funding that you could be spending on something else, and you're putting it under admin salaries, but it's not accurate, and you're basically tying up funds that could be used for something else. So those are one of the things that typically I'll send an application back for. So just make sure that when you're putting in your description, your narrative for your budget for any of these paid activities, paid positions, that you're putting in the hourly rate, the number of hours, that they're working per week. I want you to be specific in this. In the past, it's not been required, but then when you go up and add, it doesn't make sense. That was something that we started asking sites to do this past year so that we can make sure that money wasn't being wasted or not being spent because too much was being put towards administrative salaries. Okay. Any questions about that? Do I have anything else? Okay. So now let's talk about the site coordinators. Again, this would be kind of like your school principals. It'd be the people that are over the site. Now, okay, I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so a site coordinator must be identified for each proposed center or site and cannot be shared between centers and sites. So you should have a site coordinator at each of your sites. This person will be responsible for the daily operation, coordination, and delivery of services at their respective program centers. So they're the boots on the ground that's at the 21st Century site, making sure that things are going smoothly, making sure the teachers are teaching what they're supposed to be teaching, making sure that safety measures are being implemented, that sort of thing, okay? The program director and site coordinator should not be the same individual unless the subgrantee only has one site. If you got a 21st Century grant and your LEA or your CBO only has one site, then your program director and site coordinator can be the same person if you want it to be. Okay? It doesn't have to be, but you can have it the same person. This person should be responsible for ensuring all daily attendance is entered into Easy Reports. They should ensure that all 21st Century students are marked in PowerSchool, and they should be reviewing that GEPRA data for accuracy before submitting it. So the site coordinator is responsible for that site level data that needs to be reported. Daily attendance is a really, really important thing, especially now that it is one of the ways that your funding was calculated was looking at your daily attendance. And so it is really important that you're making sure that your attendance is being entered in daily through Easy Reports, and that it is accurate, that you are not overinflating numbers, that you are reporting the actual number of students that are coming to your program each day. You're also responsible, in addition to the site coordinator, to the program director, and making sure that students are marked in PowerSchool. For those of you who may be new to this program, we try to help you guys out by pulling some of your GEPRA data from PowerSchool, but we can't do that unless the students have been marked in PowerSchool as 21st Century students. So it's really important at the beginning of the school year that you make sure that all of the students who are attending your programs are marked as 21st Century students. In the past, we have asked people to go in and mark students, but we never really made them go back and unmark them, but that's going to be different this year. I'm sure we'll talk about this again in one of our future trainings. But this year, when you go in and mark your students as 21st Century, there will be a beginning and an end date for you to put in when you do that. And so hopefully your beginning and end date will be, the first day of school and last day of school. And that way, once that end date has occurred, those students will automatically be unmarked as 21st Century. Now, that does mean you're going to have to go in and mark the kids every year, but that's going to give us way more accurate numbers, so that we don't, like this past year, we had tens of thousands of students that were marked as 21st Century students that hadn't been in a 21st Century program in years. We went through and tried to clean that up as best as we could. And hopefully that won't be an issue in the future, but just be aware that that is something that you're responsible for doing. Okay. All right. Fiscal manager. You don't have to have a fiscal manager, but you definitely can have one. I don't know if you noticed, if you've applied for the grant before, something I did differently this year is that the only positions that I made mandatory this time was the program director and site coordinator. We did not make other positions mandatory because we wanted you guys to have the flexibility to hire the staff that you need to hire, and for them to do the things that you need them to do. So these were not required positions, but they are definitely positions that we advise you to have, and that you are more than welcome to pay out of 21st Century funds to hire someone. So you can call them what you want to call them, but you can have some sort of fiscal manager. Sometimes they would be referenced as a bookkeeper or a CSFO, especially at the LEA level. All 21st Century sites require a designated staff member that's responsible for bookkeeping, supply orders, other business related and administrative tasks that has to do with funding. So whether you're a CBO or an LEA, you need to have someone who is over your financial matters. And we highly, especially for CBOs, we highly recommend that you hire someone whose specific job it is to focus on 21st century financial matters. Just because we have seen in the past where some of our CBOs have had issues because they have a financial person at their organization, but they handle the finances of the entire organization. And sometimes they put 21st century on a bit of a back burner. And then you end up being late turning in the expenditure reports and things like that, and it gets that 21st century site in a bad situation. So we highly recommend, we would much rather you spend the funds on hiring an accountant or hiring someone who has financial management capabilities to focus on 21st century to make sure that you're following the rules and regulations of the grant when it comes to fiscal matters. This position would also be responsible for submitting those monthly expenditure summary reports in EGAP 2.0. Those are the reports that have to be turned in order for you to get reimbursed for your expenses, and they are supposed to be turned in monthly, but we'll talk more about that in a future training as far as what the absolute deadlines for those expenditure reports are going to be this coming year. Okay. We also recommend for you to have a data entry person. You don't have to have one. This could fall under the responsibility of the site coordinator or program director, but you are welcome to hire a data entry person. You are required to identify at least one staff member responsible for the collection and maintenance of all PowerSchool data for the required GEPRA measures. And GEPRA stands for Government Performance Results Act measures. These are I keep mentioning this and I keep forgetting that some of you may not know what that is, but that's the data that we have to collect, that you guys have to report through Easy Reports, that goes to a system called 21 APR system. And that is the data that the federal government uses to determine basically whether 21st century is working or not, whether it actually it's what the federal level 21st century employees are using to talk to Congress people and legislatures and things like that to say, this is a worthy program. We need you to continue to fund this program because look at the advances. Look at how much better the kids who are in a 21st century program do than those who are not, and that sort of thing. So that is super important that this data is reported and that it's reported on time and accurately. This data entry person may also be responsible for data sharing agreements and tracking of those GEPRA measures, attendance, discipline, assessment data. So let's say that the site coordinator doesn't have time to focus on attendance on a daily basis. They may hire a data entry person that will help make sure that attendance is entered in every day. So again, this is not a required position. It's just a recommended position that you can have. Okay. And then we have the collaboration liaison. This is something that was this was in the RFA as being a requirement. Now you don't have to have a person this doesn't have to be like a standalone job. It can be a part of one of the other positions jobs, but it did say in the RFA that you must identify at least one staff member on your 21st century team for each target school site to serve as the collaboration liaison with that school, including private schools. And so this person would be responsible for ensuring that there is some sort of active collaboration going on when it comes to program planning, implementation, and data sharing. So in other words, they're the ones who are going to make sure to facilitate and foster that conversation between the school day teachers or school day staff and the 21st century teachers or 21st century staff to make sure there is a communication taking place. We would love to see for you to have some sort of method for the teachers, the daytime teachers, to communicate with your 21st century, your after school teachers, where you're sharing information about the students that you guys are serving. Like, if you could figure out a way to have some sort of daily or weekly interaction where you report back and forth to each other, that would be the ideal situation. So in other words, it would be a way, let's say that you're going to do tutoring or you're going to do some sort of intervention as part of your after school program. Well, how are you going to know what the child needs to be tutored on if there's not a form of communication between you and that child's teacher? Of course, the kid could tell you, yeah, we're working on this, we're working on that, but do they really know? Is the kid really, I guess it depends on the age of the child, but depending on the age of the child, is the child really going to be able to tell you what their needs are better than the teacher can tell you what that child's needs are? And so if you can figure out a way to communicate back and forth, that would be ideal. But we want to see that you have somebody whose job it is to serve as this, I just called it a collaboration liaison. And again, it doesn't have to be a specific on its own standalone position. It could be the job of the site coordinator to be the collaboration liaison. It could be the job of your lead teacher to be a collaboration liaison, but somebody, when your TAs come and ask who's responsible for making sure that there's collaboration between the school and the 21st century program, you should be able to tell us who that person is and what they're doing to encourage that collaboration and that communication back and forth between those programs. Okay. All right, so it is 3:48, and the next thing is to talk about non-admin positions, but I think I'm going to go ahead and stop here to take any questions that you guys may have so that I don't keep you guys late today. So let's do a question check. Does anyone have any questions that have come up from either today's training or last week's training, or just something that's pressing that you have a question about that maybe we haven't addressed yet, but you need to know just for planning purposes? What questions do you guys have? Use my wait time. Nobody has any questions? Yes, you can ask in the chat. Please do. Or I can stop sharing my screen where I can see you guys and you can raise your hand, whichever one. If people don't ask questions, I'm going to continue with my presentation there. I'm going to keep you here the full amount of time. So we do have a lot to cover. Okay. Not seeing any specific questions. Yay, somebody asked one. Okay. All right, have a quick question. If we have a previous site coordinator from another school willing to come in for a short time during the planning phase to help new sites begin, how will we go about funding that? Okay, so just to make sure I'm clear on this is not somebody, I'm assuming that this is just someone who has helped with a program before. You're wanting to pay them some sort of fee or stipend or something to come in and work with your new sites to kind of help them get started, but they're not going to be a site coordinator, or they're not going to be a 21st century employee in this upcoming year. Is that correct? Okay. So you could treat that more like a contracted service. I'll answer the next question in a second. So you could treat that as a contracted service. So you could hire that person maybe as a could contract that person as a, what is the word I'm trying to think of? Lord, I hate it when my brain dies on me and I can't think of the most simple of words. Consultant, thank you. Thank you. A consultant, yes, you could hire them as a consultant to come in and help with your programming. Just make sure it's very, very clear what they're going to be doing and for how long they're going to be doing it for. I would not expect it to last for very long, but maybe you could pay that person, a stipend or a fee, a daily type fee or an hourly type fee for them to come in to just kind of help plan for the upcoming year. But you would need to make sure that you do a contract with that person and that it's very clear in the contract how much you're paying them, whether you're paying like a stipend or whether it's an hourly rate, and what the expectations are of that person, and for how long they're going to be doing it and the total price and that sort of thing. So yes, you can do that. Okay. Do I have additional job descriptions typed up or are they already approved by the ALSDE? No, I don't. Now, if you would like, you could refer to past RFAs that have had some job descriptions typed up in them in the past. And you can refer to them and kind of tweak those job descriptions if you would like to. Those should still be accessible on the 21st Century site, but we didn't want to provide too many positions because we really want you guys to create a position based off of what the person is actually going to be doing, not based off of the job description that we came up with at the State Department. Because a lot of times what I noticed in this past year is if I had a question about what a position was doing, I would go and look at the job descriptions, and there was often times when multiple positions said that they were responsible for doing the same thing, and you could just tell that it was like that maybe an example job description had been given and it was just kind of a copy and pasted thing, but it really wasn't thought through very well. And so when it comes down to it, who do I go to? Who is really truly in charge of data? Is it the program director, or is it the site coordinator, or is it another person? And if you've got that job duty under everybody's description, well, it's hard to hold anyone accountable. So we want you guys to really focus your job descriptions on what those positions are actually going to be doing. But again, if you need just kind of something to look at to see what's been approved in the past, I would suggest you go look at the cohort 16 or 17 RFAs because they did provide job descriptions back then. Okay. Our summer program runs through the end of July, and we planned to begin our after-school program August 11th. Do we need to adjust that date? We typically use a week to train and get the space ready for after school. We are a CBO Girls Inc. Okay. So, typically we would want you to start your program on the first day of school if at all possible. So if you can adjust your dates so that your program does start at the beginning of the school, on the first day of school, then that is definitely what is preferred. Okay. How much planning time can a site staff get in preparation for the start of the school year? Just that would be what is considered reasonable and necessary. So you would need to tell us that. Again, there's a specific form for you to fill out. If I go back and look, there's a link to it here in this presentation. Hold on, let me go back and find it really quick. I believe it's this form right here. So you would need to fill out this form and tell us how long do you need, and just get it approved. We don't have like a specific amount of time that is, we don't have like a canned answer for that question. It's really going to depend on you and your site. I would say that it depends on whether you're a brand new site or whether you've done this in the past. So that's something for you guys to submit to us. Tell us what your needs are, and we will either approve it or tell you how it needs to be, how we feel like you need to tweak it at the time once you turn that in. Okay. All right. If the 21st Century Cohort 26 FY25 funding request form was completed and submitted, can positions be posted, or do I wait until the application July 1st through September 30th is completed and submitted in EGAP? What are the expectations? Okay, so you can go ahead and submit those positions. Technically, your application has been completed. Now, what I would suggest that you do is if you have any positions that you're uncertain about, you may want to reach out to us and just ask and make sure that it's going to be okay before you hire a person in that position. But typically, if you're basically sticking to typical 21st century staff, like the administrative positions we've talked about today, or your teachers, your assistants, that sort of thing, then you're going to be fine. And you can go ahead and post those positions. We are going, you will have access, you will be able, as long as you are doing the, sorry, I'm rambling. Let me start over. If you are one of those sites that has to do the FY25 funding, you're new to 21st Century this year, you don't currently have a grant, then you are going to have to do that FY25 funding. I know you guys have submitted those funding request forms. But we are still going to have to do that application in FY25, but it's not ready yet. So what we're saying is that you can start spending funds as early as July 1st. Or not, yeah, you can start spending those funds as early as July 1st. Just understand that until that application is in EGAP, you will not be able to submit for reimbursement for those funds until it's in there and we're able to get that approved in there. So it could be September, beginning of September before that application is actually built in EGAP for you to go in and put it in. Again, you will be able to be reimbursed as far back as July 1st, but I just don't know exactly when you're going to be able to get that officially approved in EGAP. So again, you should be good as long as you're sticking with typical positions. But if you're wanting to hire somebody for something outside of the ordinary, I would just suggest you reach out to us and just make sure it's going to be okay before you hire somebody in that position. Again, your ALSDE specialists are going to be reaching out to you like this week or next week. They're going to start reaching out to you guys about your EGAP, your current FY26 EGAP applications, and letting you know if they see items in there that are not allowable, which would include positions that you may have in there. So, we'll get that taken care of as soon as possible as well, but you should be good to go. Is it the same with ordering materials and supplies? Yes. As long as you're, just be aware that we've had some sites reach out to us saying, and even somebody did today in today's presentation at the very beginning, saying their CSFO was not wanting to do the FY25 pre-funding application. So just understand that if you are a new cohort, if you don't have a cohort 16 grant right now, and you're new, got to do that portion in order to go ahead and start spending funds as early as July 1st. Okay. So just make sure that they are willing to do that. Now, if they're not wanting to do that and you don't have another way to pay for your expenses to start your program on the first day of school, I need you guys to reach out to me immediately, and we need to have that conversation, because that is the expectation. The expectation is for you to start your 21st Century program on the first day of school. And there really shouldn't be any excuse not to start it on the first day of school. even though, yes, there's extra hoops that you may have to jump through, and it is a pain, and I understand that it's a pain. And if I was any other way to do it, I would love for that to happen. But this is the only thing that we could come up with to do to give you access to those funds. So just be mindful about your expenditures. That's another thing to be careful about. Ordering materials and supplies. You guys just use your common sense, right? If it's things that we've said in today's presentation that are allowable, you're fine. If you're not certain, reach out to us and ask before you spend the money, right? Because really, and I'm just being honest. I'm sometimes overly honest sometimes. Until you have that approved application in place, you need to be careful that you're only buying things that you know for sure should be allowed. And if you're not sure if something is allowed, then please reach out and ask and go ahead and get it in writing that it's allowed before you buy things, because I would really, truly hate for you guys to start spending money on July 1st, buy something that's not allowable, and then submit it once that application is built in EGAP and under FY25, and us to tell you, no, that's not allowable, and you've already bought it. Okay. So just be careful about that kind of thing. Now, hopefully, if that's the case, hopefully anything that you buy is in your 26 application, and we'll catch it if something is not allowed, right? Hopefully we'll catch it there, and we can let you know right away, or let you know very quickly that that's not an allowable item or non-allowable expense. But if you don't have it in your 26 application, you buy something that you're not certain is allowable, that's a risk that you're taking. So just be careful about that kind of thing. Now, when it comes to your EGAP applications for materials and supplies, we don't ask you to be typically super specific about what you're purchasing. We expect you to follow the guidelines. We expect you to purchase things that are reasonable and necessary. But I always recommend that if you're not positive whether something is allowable or not, go ahead and get it approved just to make sure, because again, we don't want people buying things that aren't allowable and then not being able to be reimbursed later. It says we can begin processing POs July 1st. Yes. Yep, you can. As long as you are doing that, as long as your CSFO is good with you doing that FY25 application, which they should be. And if they're not, then let us know. Make sure I didn't finish something else. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, says for Mega, do we budget for the salaries of people who will be attending? So for that one, you need to follow your LEA's guidelines of how you typically handle professional development where people are traveling, and you need to follow the same guidelines. So for example, so typically you would not pay them a salary and pay them like the MEI rate or I'm trying to think of what it's the per diem. You wouldn't do both typically. You might, it just depends on your LEA's rules and regulations. And so if you typically, like for example, if during the summer you typically would pay a teacher a salary and pay for their travel expenses and things like that to go to a conference, then you would stick to those same rules and regulations that your LEA does. But I know a lot of LEAs, that's not typically what would happen. They would give them a per diem or something like that, or maybe some sort of stipend for that day. but not necessarily a salary. It wouldn't necessarily be considered like a typical salary or paying them for like their daily salary to go to that. Just be careful that you're not like double dipping and things like that, but follow your local LEA's rules and regulations. Now, if you're a CBO, then you need to put some rules and regulations in place of what you do and don't cover when it comes to travel, and determine how you would pay for that. Typically, but what would typically be allowable would be, mileage, and then some sites are going to base most LEAs are going to kind of follow the state guidelines, which would be you get, your mileage, you get your per diem, which is like a daily rate, which would include the expense of your hotel and the expense of your food. But then some sites may actually do a full reimbursement for hotel costs. It just depends on the site. It depends on the LEA and their rules and regulations. Any other questions? I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Okay, it is 4:07, so we've gone a little bit over. Yes, I'm sorry. I should have done that. Let me share my screen again and put back up. So yes, you do need to sign out. You're going to go back to the same form that you went to at the beginning of the presentation to sign out. Let me share again and go back to, I wasn't sure how far we would get in our slides, and so I did not put it in a slide, but I'm going to go back to that first one. So you can see here is the QR code. And again, I will put the link in the chat. So again, when we go and check attendance, we expect to see that you signed in and then about 3 hours later you signed out. Whether you're doing this today live or whether you're watching the video at a later time, that is what the expectation would be. So please make sure you've signed both in and out to show that you were here for the entire presentation. We do the same thing for in-person meetings. We just found that in the past we've had issues with program directors or site coordinators coming for part of a meeting but not staying for the entire time, and that's not acceptable. You're expected to be at the entire meeting, so we do tend to ask for people to sign out when they leave as well. All right, so our next meeting, trying to remember when it is. Hold on, let me look at my calendar. Don't think we have one. Oh my goodness, my phone is acting crazy. Hold on a second. So make sure you signed out, and don't think we have a meeting next week, but let me look and make sure I'm not lying to you on that. Yeah, so next week is the 4th of July week. So, oh, thank you, Erica. Appreciate that. Our next meeting will be on Tuesday, July 8th. We will have 2 sessions, but it's going to be the same meeting for both sessions. So you just need to come to one of them. They'll be from 9 to 12 and then 3 to 6. And we will continue going through the RFA and talking about various requirements of the RFA. Please remember that all site coordinators and program directors are expected to attend at least one of the 2 sessions, preferably live. And if you have any questions that come up between now and then, please do not hesitate to reach out and ask. And that's it. We're going to stop for the day. I'll stay in for just a little bit longer in case anybody else has any questions. But other than that, I'm going to stop the recording and stop sharing my screen. And we will see you guys. I hope you all have a wonderful 4th of July weekend next week. And we will see you the following week on Tuesday, July the 8th. Thanks.